Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a medieval castle not as a knight, not as a lord, but as a scribe. And let me tell you, if you think your winter heating bill is rough, imagine spending every night in a stone fortress built to repel armies not cold. You're clutching a quill all day in a drafty scriptorium, your fingers already numb, and now the sun's gone down. The temperature inside the castle is dropping fast. Outside it's maybe 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside maybe 30, if you're lucky. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Someone's falling asleep in Tokyo while someone else is just waking up in Toronto. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself in the year 1350. You're a scribe, a trained copyist living in a castle somewhere in northern France. Your job is to reproduce manuscripts, religious texts, legal documents, the occasional illuminated Bible, if you're skilled enough. But right now, your job is just to survive the night. The stone walls around you are 3 feet thick. They keep enemies out beautifully. They also trap cold like a wine cellar traps darkness. You probably won't survive this if you don't know the tricks. The thing about medieval castles is they were never designed for comfort. They were designed for defense. Every architectural choice, the narrow windows, the thick walls, the high ceilings, was about making it harder for someone to kill you with a sword or a flaming arrow. Unfortunately, those same features also made it nearly impossible to stay warm. Heat rises, and in a great hall with a ceiling 20 feet high, all that precious warmth from the hearth just floats away. You're left sitting in the cold bottom layer of air, the stuff nobody wants. And you're a scribe, which means you're not exactly high on the castle's priority list. Knights get chambers closer to the kitchens where residual heat seeps through the walls. The lord and lady have the solar, the best room in the castle sometimes with its own fireplace. You get a corner, maybe a thin partition separating you from 3 other scribes. Maybe not even that. Your bedroom, and I'm using that term generously, is more like a survival pod. There's a wooden bed frame if you're fortunate. A straw mattress that's been refilled twice this year, though it's already compacting into a lumpy, musty slab. Wool blankets, thick, heavy, scratchy things that smell faintly of sheep and smoke. You've got maybe 4 or 5 of them piled up. In deeper winter, you'll add 2 more. The air in this room is so cold you can see your breath as you undress, or rather as you don't undress, because nobody in their right mind sleeps naked in a medieval castle. You're keeping your linen undertunic on. You're keeping your woolen hose on. You're adding a sleeping cap, a simple cloth hood that keeps heat from escaping through your scalp. You've learned that your head is a chimney. If you don't cover it, you'll wake at midnight shivering so hard your teeth crack together. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood thermodynamics, but they sure understood cold. They knew instinctively that heat escaped from extremities. Hands, feet, head, these were the traitors. So you wrapped them, you buried them. You tucked your hands under your armpits and your feet under the dog sleeping at the foot of the bed. Oh yes, the dog. Let's talk about that in a moment. But first let's acknowledge the silence. At night, a castle is eerily quiet. The great hall below might have a few servants cleaning up their footsteps echoing on flagstones. Somewhere a guard is walking the battlements, his boots crunching on frost. But up here in your little corner of the scribes' quarters, there's just cold. It presses against the walls, it seeps through the gaps around the wooden shutters. It curls around your ankles like an invisible cat. You're not afraid of the dark. You're afraid of the cold. Because cold is the thing that kills. Not dramatically, not like a sword through the chest, but slowly, methodically, one frozen finger at a time. And yet somehow you'll sleep. Somehow scribes survived winter after winter in these stone tombs. They had strategies. Some of them were clever, some were desperate. And some were just the grim acceptance that this was life. And life was cold. And you either adapted or you didn't wake up in the spring. So let's figure out how you're going to make it through tonight. Let's talk about the bed, the blankets, the body. Heat the prayers and the tiny flickering hope that dawn will come before the frost does. The castle itself is your enemy. Not in a dramatic, personified way, it's not trying to kill you, but its very design is working against your survival. Every stone in these walls was chosen for its ability to absorb impact to resist battering rams and siege engines. Limestone, granite, sandstone, dense, heavy, cold-holding rock. In summer, this is a blessing. The thick walls keep the interior cool when the sun is baking the countryside. But in winter, those same walls become thermal sinks. They absorb the cold from outside and radiate it inward slowly, relentlessly all night long. You can feel it as you sit on the edge of your bed. If you press your palm against the stone wall beside you, it's like touching ice. Not metaphorically, literally. In the deepest weeks of January, a thin layer of frost can form on the interior walls of a castle. You've seen it. Delicate white crystals spreading across the stone like a frozen tapestry. It's beautiful in a hostile, indifferent way. Nature reminding you that beauty doesn't care whether you live or die. The windows don't help. Most castle windows are narrow slits, archer's loops designed so a bowman can shoot out while presenting minimal target area to attackers. They're called arrow slits, and they're brilliant for defence. Terrible for everything else. Even when they're shuttered and yours is a simple wooden panel latched from the inside, cold air finds its way through. Medieval carpentry wasn't airtight. There are gaps. You can feel the draught snaking across the floor, pooling around your ankles. Some wealthier castle chambers have oiled linen or even glass in the windows, but you're a scribe. You don't get glass. Oiled linen maybe if the castle's lord is particularly generous, or if the scriptorium is important enough to warrant protection of the manuscripts. But in your sleeping quarters, just wood. Just a barrier that's more symbolic than functional. The ceiling above you is vaulted stone, another architectural marvel that's absolutely punishing in winter. Heat rises. You know this because you've spent countless nights lying in bed staring upward, watching your breath drift toward the ceiling and disappear into the shadows. All that warmth from the hearth in the hall below, all that precious heat generated by burning wood that someone had to chop and haul and stack, it's all floating up there completely out of reach while you're down here shivering under 6 layers of wool. Historians still argue whether medieval builders understood convection, but some castles did experiment with solutions. Hippocaust's underfloor heating systems inherited from the Romans existed in a few grand structures, but they were rare and expensive to maintain. Most castles just accepted the cold. It was part of the deal. You built for war, not comfort. The floors are just as unforgiving. Flagstones usually. Cold, hard, and slightly damp no matter the season. In your quarters there might be a layer of rushes scattered across the floor, dried reeds or straw that provide a thin cushion and absorb some moisture. But rushes also absorb cold. Step out of bed barefoot in the middle of the night and the shock of icy stone against your soles is enough to wake you fully instantly, your body flooding with adrenaline as if you've just plunged into a frozen lake. Some scribes keep wooden clogs beside the bed for exactly this reason. Slip them on before your feet touch the floor. It's a small thing, but small things are the difference between misery and slightly less misery. The castle's layout doesn't do you any favours either. The Great Hall, the warmest part of the structure, is downstairs. The hearth there is massive, large enough to roast an entire pig, and it burns all evening. The lord and his household gather there for supper for entertainment for the simple animal comfort of being near fire. But once the evening ends, once everyone retreats to their private chambers, that fire is banked, covered with ash to keep a few coals alive until morning, but no longer producing significant heat. And you're upstairs, or in a side wing, or tucked into a corner of the scriptorium complex that's attached to the main keep but not really part of it. Heat doesn't travel horizontally through stone, it doesn't seep through walls. The warmth from the Great Hall might as well be on another planet. Some castles have secondary hearths in private chambers, small fireplaces built into the walls of important rooms. The Lord's Solar usually has one. The Lady's Chamber might have another, but the Scribe's quarters. You're lucky if there's a communal brazier in the scriptorium itself, a small charcoal-burning pot that you can huddle around during the day. At night it's extinguished. Fire risk. One stray ember landing in a pile of manuscripts and you've just incinerated decades of work. So you go to bed cold, not chilly, not uncomfortable, cold. The kind of cold that makes your muscles tense involuntarily, that makes your shoulders hunch and your jaw clench. The kind of cold that turns sleep into a negotiation between your body's desperate need for rest and its equally desperate need to generate warmth through shivering. And here's the thing that really gets you. It's inside. You're indoors. You're in a structure that represents the pinnacle of medieval engineering and wealth. This castle cost a fortune to build. It houses dozens of people. It's a symbol of power and permanence. And yet inside its walls you're barely better off than a peasant sleeping in a drafty cottage. Actually, the peasant might be warmer. Their cottage is smaller, easier to heat, and they probably have a central hearth that never goes out. You pull the blankets tighter. Outside, the wind picks up and you hear it moaning through the battlements, a low, mournful sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. The cold presses closer. Tomorrow you'll wake if you wake and return to your desk. You'll pick up your quill. You'll copy Latin texts you've copied 100 times before. Your fingers will be stiff. The ink might be sluggish in its horn, but you'll work because that's what scribes do. Tonight, though, you just need to survive. So where exactly do you sleep? That's the question that defines everything about your nightly survival strategy. Because scribe isn't a single role with a single accommodation standard. It's a spectrum. And where you fall on that spectrum determines whether you're sleeping in something resembling a private space or huddling in a corner with 3 other copyists trying not to kick each other in your sleep. Let's start with the reality. Most scribes face you probably don't have a bedroom. Not in the modern sense. Not even in the medieval noble sense. Private chambers are a luxury reserved for the very top of the social ladder. The lord, the lady may be a visiting bishop or a high-ranking knight. Everyone else sleeps in shared spaces, and the hierarchy of those spaces is brutal and precise. If you're a working scribe in a castle's administrative wing, you might sleep in the scriptorium itself. Yes, the same room where you work. When the sun goes down and the light becomes too dim for copying, you don't leave and go to a separate dormitory. You just stay. You push your stool back from the writing desk, you unroll a thin straw pallet from the corner, and you lay it down on the floor between the manuscript storage shelves. Maybe there's a wooden partition, a simple screen that gives the illusion of privacy. Maybe there's not. Other scribes are doing the same thing around you. The head scribe, the most senior copyist, the one who's been here 20 years and knows every gospel by heart, he gets the spot closest to the brazier. Not because there's a fire in it at night, there isn't, but because during the day it's the warmest spot and some residual heat lingers in the stones around it. You being younger, less experienced, get a spot near the window. Congratulations, you've won the draft lottery. Some castles have dedicated scribal quarters, especially if the castle supports a large administrative staff. These are communal rooms, long narrow chambers lined with simple wooden bed frames. Think of a barracks, but for clerks instead of soldiers. You get a bed, a thin straw mattress, maybe a wooden chest at the foot of the bed for your personal belongings, which aren't many, an extra tunic, a comb, a prayer book, if you're devout or literate enough to own one. The beds are arranged in rows. You're sleeping inches away from the scribe to your left and the scribe to your right. You know their breathing patterns. You know who snores. You know who grinds their teeth. You know who gets up 3 times a night to piss in the communal chamber pot. Privacy is not a concept that applies here. Historians still argue whether this communal sleeping arrangement was purely practical, or whether it served a social function, keeping scribes together, fostering a sense of collective identity, making it easier to monitor them. Because let's be honest, scribes had access to sensitive information, legal documents, letters from the king, financial records. Keeping them in a supervised shared space meant they were less likely to wander off and sell secrets. But let's say you're slightly higher up the ladder. Maybe you're a notary, a scribe with legal training, someone who can draft contracts and witness documents. You might get a small alcove off the main hall. Not a room exactly. More like a niche carved into the thickness of the castle wall, just big enough for a narrow bed and maybe a shelf. You hang a curtain across the opening, heavy wall probably, and that's your door. It doesn't block sound, it doesn't block cold, but it blocks sight, and that's something. These alcoves are surprisingly common in medieval castles. The walls are so thick, 10 feet, sometimes 12, that architects could carve out little pockets of space within them. Some alcoves were used for storage. Some became impromptu sleeping nooks. You'd be shocked how many people in a castle sleep in these architectural afterthoughts. Then there are the scribes who serve monastic communities. If the castle has a chapel with a resident priest, and if that priest needs assistance with correspondence or record keeping, you might be attached to the chapel complex. Your sleeping arrangement is even more austere. Monasteries have rules, strict ones, about where and how monks and their assistants sleep. Individual cells usually. Small stone chambers with a door, a bed, a crucifix on the wall. No heat. Cold as a form of spiritual discipline. You're supposed to suffer. Suffering brings you closer to God. At least that's what the abbot tells you when you complain about waking with frost on your blanket. And if you're really unlucky, if you're an itinerant scribe travelling from castle to castle, hired on short-term contracts to help with a backlog of legal documents, or to copy a lord's new acquisition of manuscripts, you sleep wherever there's space. Sometimes that's the great hall itself. After the evening meal, after the tables are cleared and the lord's household retires, servants spread straw on the floor, and anyone without a designated sleeping spot just lies down. You're surrounded by servants, by visiting merchants, by soldiers off duty. It's noisy. It smells like sweat and smoke and dogs. But it's warmer than sleeping alone in a side chamber because you've got 50 bodies generating heat in an enclosed space. The Great Hall option has one massive advantage: the hearth. Even banked, even reduced to a pile of glowing coals under a blanket of ash, that fireplace radiates warmth. If you can position your straw pallet within 10 feet of it, you've won the medieval lottery. You'll still be cold, don't get me wrong, but you'll be less cold. And less cold is a victory. Some scribes get creative. They find unused spaces, storage rooms, the upper levels of gatehouses, corners of the chapel choir loft. Anywhere with 4 walls and a spot to lie down. The castle is full of these interstitial spaces, and if you're clever and quiet about it, you can claim one. Of course, you're also gambling that a guard won't roust you in the middle of the night, or that the steward won't discover you've been sleeping in the room where they store dried fish. So tonight, where are you? Let's say you're in the communal scribes' quarters. 6 beds, stone walls, 1 shuttered window, no fire. The scribe in the bed next to yours is already asleep, breathing heavily through his mouth. Another is murmuring prayers, his voice barely audible. You lie down, pull the blankets up to your chin, and feel the cold settling in around you like an uninvited guest. This is where you'll spend the night. Not in comfort, not in safety from the cold, just here. In the company of other shivering men, all of you performing the same nightly ritual of survival. Now let's talk about the pecking order, because in a medieval castle where you sleep isn't just about logistics, it's about status. And status, when winter comes, is the difference between waking up with all your toes and waking up with blackened extremities that the castle's barber surgeon has to amputate with a saw and a prayer. You're a scribe. That puts you somewhere in the middle of the castle's social hierarchy. You're not a noble, not even close. But you're not a peasant either. You're educated, you can read, you can write in Latin, maybe even French if you're particularly skilled. You have a profession which elevates you above the masses of illiterate labourers. But within the scribal community itself there's a ladder. And every rung of that ladder comes with sleeping privileges. At the top, the master scribe, sometimes called the head clerk or the chancellor's assistant, depending on the castle's administrative structure. This is the man, and yes, it's almost always a man who's been copying manuscripts for 30 years. His handwriting is flawless. His knowledge of legal Latin is encyclopedic. When the Lord needs a document drafted, this is who gets called. And his sleeping arrangement reflects his value. The master scribe gets a bed closest to any source of warmth. If there's a communal sleeping chamber with a brazier that's lit during the day, he's beside it. If the scriptorium has a small hearth that's allowed to burn in the evening before being extinguished, he's positioned within its radiant range. His bed frame is sturdier, probably oak instead of pine. His mattress is thicker. He might even have a feather pillow, a genuine luxury that most scribes never experience. Feathers retain heat better than straw. They mould to your head. They represent wealth. He also gets more blankets, not because he's purchased them himself necessarily, but because the castle's chamberlain, the person responsible for household management, allocates resources based on importance. The master scribe is important. His work keeps the castle's legal and administrative machinery running, so he gets an extra wool blanket, maybe even a fur-throw rabbit or squirrel pelts sewn together that he can drape over his legs. And here's where it gets interesting. The master scribe often has discretion over who sleeps where. He assigns the spots in the communal chamber. He decides who gets the alcove, who sleeps near the window, who gets relegated to the drafty corner by the door. This power is subtle but significant. Cross the master scribe, make an error in copying, show up late to work, complain too loudly about conditions, and you might find yourself reassigned to the coldest spot in the room. Historians still argue whether this hierarchy was formalized in writing or simply understood through practice, but the evidence from monastic rules and household accounts suggests it was very real. Seniority mattered, skill mattered, favour mattered. Below the master scribe are the journeyman scribes who've completed their training and are competent but not yet masterful. You're probably in this category. You've been copying for 5, maybe 10 years. You can produce clean, readable text. You don't make many mistakes. You're reliable. Your sleeping spot reflects this middle-of-the-room, middle-quality mattress standard allotment of 3 or 4 blankets. You're not suffering the worst of it, but you're not comfortable either. And then there are the apprentices, Oh, the apprentices. These are boys, usually sometimes as young as 10 or 12, learning the craft. They're not full scribes yet. They spend their days preparing parchment, mixing ink, sharpening quills, and copying simple texts under supervision. Their handwriting is still developing. They make mistakes. They're expendable in the cold calculation of medieval hierarchy. So they get the worst sleeping spots. The corner by the door where every time someone enters or leaves during the night to use the latrine to check on something, a blast of cold air sweeps across them. The spot under the window where the draft is constant. The edge of the room farthest from any residual warmth. Their mattresses are the thinnest, often just a canvas sack stuffed with straw that's been used for 2 seasons and is mostly compressed into hard lumps. Their blanket allotment is minimal 2, maybe 3 thin wool coverings that are more symbolic than functional. And if there's a shortage, if the castle's wool stores are running low, if the chamberlain needs to make cuts, the apprentices lose a blanket first. This isn't cruelty for its own sake. It's economics. The master scribe is valuable and difficult to replace. Training a scribe to his level takes decades. Keeping him healthy, keeping him alive through winter is a practical investment. An apprentice. If one dies from cold or illness, you can recruit another peasant boy who shows promise. Harsh yes. But medieval castles didn't run on sentiment. Some apprentices try to game the system. They'll volunteer for extra duties, staying up late to organise manuscripts, waking early to light the scriptorium's brazier, hoping to earn favour and a better sleeping assignment. Sometimes it works. A master scribe who notices dedication might reward it, with a spot closer to the centre of the room away from the door. Other apprentices form alliances. 2 or 3 of them will push their beds together, pooling their blankets and body heat. This isn't officially sanctioned, but it's rarely forbidden. As long as they show up for work on time and perform their duties, the master scribe doesn't care how they survive the night. And then there's the wild card, the visiting scribe. Occasionally a scribe from another castle or monastery will arrive, sent to borrow a specific manuscript to assist with a large copying project to deliver documents. These visitors exist outside the normal hierarchy. They're guests technically, which means they're owed hospitality. But they're also competitors for limited resources. Usually a visiting scribe gets inserted into the sleeping arrangement somewhere in the middle. Not the best spot that would insult the master scribe's authority, but not the worst either. Unless the visitor is himself a master, in which case there might be awkward negotiations about precedence. 2 alphas in 1 cold chamber. You can imagine the tension. You lie in your bed, the middle-ranked scribe, and you're aware of all this. You can hear the master scribe's deeper, slower breathing. He's warm enough to relax into proper sleep. You can hear the apprentice by the door shifting constantly, trying to find a position where the draft doesn't hit him directly. You know your place. You've accepted it. Tomorrow you'll wake and the hierarchy will still be there, carved into the sleeping arrangements as surely as it's carved into the castle stones. For now you pull your blankets tighter and try to generate enough warmth to drift off. Rank has its privileges. But tonight even privilege only gets you so far. You don't undress for bed. Let's just establish that right now, because if you're imagining some medieval equivalent of putting on pyjamas, you're going to freeze to death before midnight. The idea of sleepwear as a separate category of clothing, something specifically designed to be worn in bed and nowhere else, that's a luxury that belongs to warmer eras and wealthier classes. For you, a working scribe in a cold castle, your sleep clothing is your day clothing, with additions. During the day, you've been wearing a linen undertunic. It's a long shirt, basically falling to mid-thigh, made of undyed linen, that's been washed so many times it's soft and thin. Over that, a woolen tunic, your main garment, belted at the waist, long-sleeved, probably a drab brown or grey. Wool is everything in medieval cold-weather survival. It insulates, even when damp. It breathes. It's itchy as hell, but you've learned to ignore that. On your legs, woolen hose. These are like fitted stockings that tie to your belt, or braise medieval underwear, essentially a linen loincloth. Your feet are wrapped in wool footcloths before being shoved into leather shoes. Footcloths are just rectangles of wool fabric that you wrap around your feet like bandages. Socks as we know them don't really exist yet, not the knitted kind with heels and toes. Footcloths do the job, sort of. Now it's night. You're preparing for bed. What comes off? Almost nothing. The shoes, yes. You step out of those and line them up beside your bed. You'll need them in the morning and you don't want to waste time searching. But the hose stay on, the linen undertunic stays on, the woolen tunic. This is where you make a decision. Some scribes sleep in their full day tunic, others remove it and sleep in just the linen layer, then pile the woolen tunic on top of themselves as an extra blanket. Both strategies have merit. If you keep the tunic on, you maintain a consistent layer of insulation around your torso. Your body heat is trapped close. But wool is heavy, and sleeping in it can be restrictive. If you remove it and use it as a blanket, you gain mobility, and you add one more layer to the pile on top of you. But there's a gap in coverage. Wool draped over you doesn't insulate as efficiently as wool worn against your skin. Tonight, let's say you keep it on. You're too tired to fuss with rearranging blankets, and you know from experience that keeping your core warm is priority one. Now comes the critical addition, the sleeping cap. This is a simple linen or wool coif, a close-fitting hood that covers your head ties, under your chin, and sometimes has flaps that come down over your ears. You look ridiculous in it. You don't care, because you've learned through brutal trial and error that an uncovered head in a cold room is a thermodynamic disaster. Your head represents roughly 10% of your body's surface area, but it can account for 40 or 50% of your heat loss when exposed in cold conditions. Medieval people didn't know the exact percentages, but they knew the experience sleep without a cap, and you wake up shivering teeth, chattering with a headache that feels like someone drove a spike through your temple. Sleep with a cap and you're merely cold instead of hypothermic. Some scribes wear two caps, a linen one underneath and a wool one over it. The linen wicks away moisture from your scalp because yes, you'll sweat a little under all these layers even in freezing temperatures, and the wool provides insulation. It's the same layering principle you use for your torso. Your hands are a problem. During the day, you can't wear gloves while writing, you need finger dexterity to hold a quill. But at night you need to keep your hands warm, or you'll wake up with fingers so stiff you can't flex them without pain. Some scribes sleep with their hands tucked into their armpits, a classic heat preservation move. Others have fingerless mitts made of wool that keep the palms and backs of the hands warm while leaving fingers free in case you need to adjust blankets or scratch an itch in the middle of the night. You don't have mitts. You're tucking your hands under your armpits tonight, which means you're sleeping in a sort of self-hug position. It's not comfortable, but comfort is not the goal. Survival is. Historians still argue whether medieval people wore braids to bed or removed them, and honestly the evidence is sparse and contradictory. Some manuscripts show figures in bed wearing what looks like underwear. Others show them nude under blankets. The truth probably varied by individual preference, social class, and how cold it was. You're keeping yours on, one more layer between you and the void. Now let's talk about the blankets themselves, because this is where medieval textile technology either saves you or fails you. You've got 5 blankets piled on your bed. Each one is wool. There's no cotton, no synthetic fleece, no down comforters. Just wool. Thick, heavy, scratchy wool that smells faintly of lanolin and smoke. The bottom blanket is the oldest, most worn. It's got holes. It's been patched. It's more sentiment than function at this point, but it's still a layer. The next 3 are in better condition, dense weaves that still have some loftsome air trapping capability. The top blanket is the heaviest, almost like a rug. It's the final defense against the cold air in the room. Together these 5 blankets weigh maybe 20 pounds. That weight is both good and bad. Good because it creates pressure holding warm air close to your body. Bad because it's oppressive, like sleeping under a pile of stones. You can't move easily. Rolling over requires genuine effort. But movement generates heat loss anyway, so maybe immobility is a feature, not a bug. Some wealthier scribes or scribes in wealthier castles have access to fur. Rabbit pelts sewn together into a throw, squirrel fur lining a cloak that doubles as a blanket, sheepskin with the wool still attached laid fur side down so you're sleeping directly against it. Fur is warmer than wool, ounce for ounce. It's also expensive. You don't have fur. What you do have is a pillow stuffed with straw. It crackles when you move your head. Bits of straw poke through the linen case and scratch at your cheek. A feather pillow would be softer, quieter, warmer. But feather pillows are for people higher up the ladder. You get straw. At least it's something to rest your head on besides the flat hard mattress. You climb into bed fully dressed, pull the pile of blankets up over yourself, adjust your sleeping cap, tuck your hands under your arms, and curl into a semi-fetal position, the most heat-efficient posture. Your knees are drawn up, your chin is tucked toward your chest, your shoulders are rounded forward. You're making yourself small, minimizing surface area, reducing exposure. And now you wait. For warmth, for sleep, for morning. Your clothes are your armor tonight, not against swords, but against the slow, patient enemy that seeps through stone walls and pools on floors and steals the heat from your breath. You're as prepared as you can be. Now you just have to make it until dawn. The bed itself is not a place of comfort. Let's be clear about that. When you think bed, you probably imagine something soft, supportive, maybe with a pillow-top mattress and memory foam. That's not what you're lying on. What you're lying on is basically an agricultural product that someone decided could double as furniture. Your bed frame is wooden, simple construction, 4 posts connected by rails, maybe 3 feet off the ground. The height isn't about comfort, it's about keeping you away from the coldest layer of air which settles on the floor like invisible fog. Cold air is denser than warm air, it sinks. So sleeping directly on the ground would be suicide. 3 feet up you're in slightly warmer territory, slightly. The frame supports a lattice of rope, yes rope, woven back and forth in a grid pattern creating a flexible surface. This is your box spring. Except there's no spring to it, just hemp rope under tension. Over time the rope stretches, it sags in the middle. Every few months someone has to tighten it using a special tool to crank the tension back up. There's even a phrase for this: sleep tight. You're literally tightening the rope so the bed doesn't sag. The phrase will survive into the 21st century long after anyone remembers why. On top of the rope lattice sits your mattress. And I'm using the word mattress generously here because what you're actually sleeping on is a large fabric sack, usually canvas or rough linen stuffed with straw. That's it, just straw. Dried stalks of wheat or rye or whatever grain was harvested last season. It was soft when it was first stuffed with a little bit of give to it. But after weeks of use, after absorbing the moisture from your body night, after being compressed by your weight, it's become lumpy and uneven. There are hard spots where the straw has compacted into dense clumps. There are thin spots where the straw has broken down into dust. And it smells. Not terrible, not like rot or sewage, but definitely organic. A musty hay-like smell with undertones of sweat. And if you're being honest, a faint hint of mildew. Straw retains moisture. In a cold, damp castle, that moisture never fully evaporates. So your mattress is perpetually a little bit damp, a little bit funky. Some castles replace the straw twice a year, once in autumn, after the harvest, once in spring. Others stretch it out, replacing it only once a year. Yours was refilled last September. It's now January. The straw is well past its prime, but you're not getting fresh stuffing until autumn rolls around again. You make do. The truly wealthy nobles, bishops, the occasional rich merchants sleep on feather mattresses. Imagine that. A sack stuffed with goose down instead of straw. Soft, light, insulating, luxurious. A feather mattress molds to your body. It retains heat beautifully. It doesn't smell like a barn. But a feather mattress costs as much as a working man makes in several months. You're a scribe. You get straw. Actually, there's a middle ground that some better-off scribes achieve: a straw mattress with a feather bed on top. Not a full feather mattress, but a thin quilted layer maybe 2 inches thick filled with feathers or down. It doesn't replace the straw. It just cushions you from the worst of it. If you're lucky enough to work in a bishop's household or a particularly prosperous castle, you might have access to this setup. Most scribes don't. Beneath the mattress, some people place a wooden board across the rope lattice extra support to keep the mattress from sagging too much. This makes the bed firmer, less yielding, but also more stable. You don't have a board. You're sleeping directly on the rope-supported straw sack, which means you're in a slight hammock situation. Your body weight creates a depression in the middle. Your hips and shoulders are lower than your head and feet. It's not ideal for spinal alignment, but medieval people aren't thinking about spinal alignment. They're thinking about not freezing. Now the blankets, we've talked about them, but let's talk about how they're actually used, because there's technique involved. You don't just throw 5 blankets on top of yourself randomly. There's an order. The bottom blanket, the one closest to your body, is usually linen or a linen-wool blend. This is your base layer. It's lighter than the others, and it serves as a barrier between your clothing and the heavier wool above. Some people tuck this blanket around themselves like a cocoon trapping a layer of air. Others just drape it loosely. You're a tucker. You want that air layer sealed in. On top of that, the wool blankets layered in order of increasing weight. Each one is slightly larger than the one below it, so they cascade down the sides of the bed. The goal is to eliminate gaps. Any space where cold air can sneak in is a failure point. You're building a textile fortress. The heaviest blanket goes on top. This is the one that's almost like a piece of carpet. Thick, dense, probably woven in a tight twill that blocks wind. It's the final barrier between you and the room. Some of these top blankets have decorative borders or simple patterns, but yours is plain. Function over form. Some scribes sleep with a blanket under them as well, between their body and the mattress. This helps insulate from below because the straw mattress doesn't provide much warmth on its own, and the cold from the rope lattice and the bed frame can seep upward. If you have a 6th blanket, that's where it goes. You don't. 5 is all you have. So you're losing heat downward into the mattress, which is thermodynamically inefficient, but there's nothing you can do about it. Historians still argue whether medieval beds were deliberately designed to be narrow, forcing people into compact sleeping positions, or whether they were narrow simply because fabric was expensive and there was no point making a bed wider than necessary. Either way, your bed is maybe 2.5 feet wide. You're sleeping on your side knees drawn up because there's not enough room to sprawl. At the head of the bed, propped against the wall, is your straw pillow. We've talked about the pillow, but here's an additional detail. Some scribes wrap their pillow in an extra layer of fabric at night, a wool scarf or a spare tunic to add insulation around their head and neck. Your neck is a major heat loss zone. Blood vessels close to the surface, thin skin, high circulation. Keeping your neck covered is almost as important as covering your head. You adjust the pillow, trying to find an angle where the straw doesn't poke too aggressively through the linen case. It crackles under your ear. You've learned to tune it out. The bed creaks when you shift position. The wooden frame, the rope lattice, the straw, all of it makes noise. In the communal sleeping chamber, you can hear the other beds creaking too. Someone rolling over, someone adjusting their blankets, the symphony of people trying to get comfortable in fundamentally uncomfortable circumstances. This is your bed. This is where you'll spend the next 8 or 9 hours, assuming you can sleep that long. It's not soft. It's not warm. But it's yours. It's off the floor. It has blankets. By medieval standards, that's not nothing. You close your eyes. The straw crackles one more time as you settle. The cold presses in from all sides. And you wait for sleep. Here's the thing nobody tells you about medieval sleeping arrangements until you're actually living them. You're probably not sleeping alone. And I don't mean that in a romantic sense, I mean that in a pure survival sense. Bodies generate heat. Heat is the most valuable commodity in a winter castle, so bodies get shared. If you're a scribe in the communal quarters, there's a decent chance your bed contains more than just you. Maybe it's another scribe, maybe it's 2 other scribes. The bed is narrow, yes, but when the alternative is freezing to death, personal space becomes a luxury you can't afford. 3 grown men can fit in a bed designed for one if they're all lying on their sides packed together like spoons in a drawer. This isn't unusual. It's not even remarked upon in most historical records because it was so common it barely warranted mention. Sharing a bed for warmth was as normal as sharing a table for meals. You did it because the alternative was worse. The physics are simple. Your body produces heat through metabolic processes, burning calories, moving blood, maintaining a core temperature of roughly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. But in a cold room, you're constantly losing that heat to the environment through radiation, convection, and conduction. It's a losing battle when you're alone. Add another body, though, and suddenly you've got twice the heat production, in roughly the same enclosed space under the blankets. Add a third body, and the math gets even better. So tonight, let's say there's another scribe in bed with you. His name is something like William or Robert, or John, common names the medieval equivalent of Mike or Dave. He's roughly your age, maybe a bit older. He climbed into bed first, taking the spot closer to the wall, because that's the warmer spot, less exposed to the room's air. You're on the outside edge, which means you're the windbreak. You'll be colder, but tomorrow night maybe you'll trade positions. There's an informal fairness to these arrangements. William is already lying on his side, facing the wall, knees drawn up. You climb in behind him, arranging yourself in the same position. Your chest is against his back. Your knees are tucked behind his knees. Your arm, the lower one, is trapped awkwardly beneath you, and you know from experience it's going to go numb in about 20 minutes. But you'll deal with that when it happens. For now, you're getting the benefit of his body heat radiating backward into you. This is called spooning, though that term won't be invented for several more centuries. Right now, it's just called survival. The blankets get pulled up over both of you. 5 blankets for 2 people is better than 5 blankets for 1. More bodies under the same insulation means a smaller heat loss to heat production ratio. It's thermodynamically sound. It's also intimate in a way that modern sensibilities might find awkward, but medieval people didn't have the same cultural baggage around physical closeness. Touch was common. Bodies were pragmatic tools, not sacred vessels of individual identity. You can feel William's breathing slow, steady, already deepening towards sleep. You can smell him too. Not unpleasant exactly, but definitely present. Sweat wool, the faint tang of the onions he ate at supper. Everyone smells in a medieval castle. There's no daily bathing. Deodorant won't be invented for another 600 years. You've learned to breathe through your mouth when necessary. His back is warm against your chest. You can feel the heat seeping through his woolen tunic into yours. It's working. Your core temperature, which was dropping as you lay alone waiting for him to finish his evening prayers, starts to stabilize. You're still cold, don't misunderstand, but you're no longer in danger of that desperate bone-deep cold that keeps you awake all night shivering. In some sleeping arrangements, especially in monasteries or stricter religious households, there are rules about bed sharing. You're supposed to sleep head to foot your head at one end, the other person's head at the other end to avoid temptation. Because apparently the medieval church was very concerned about what might happen if two men slept face to face under a blanket. Whether anyone actually followed this rule is debatable. It's thermodynamically stupid for one thing. You lose more heat from your head than from your feet, so putting two heads at opposite ends means maximum heat loss from the bed as a whole. You're not in a monastery though, you're in a castle scriptorium. The rules are looser. Head to head is fine, spooning is fine, whatever keeps you alive until morning is fine. Historians still argue whether bed sharing was primarily a lower class phenomenon or whether nobles did it too. The evidence suggests it was universal at least in winter. Even kings shared beds with trusted servants or companions on particularly cold nights. Henry VIII, a couple centuries in your future, will be recorded as occasionally sharing a bed with his male courtiers. It wasn't scandalous, it was practical. But here's the complication. Not everyone is a good bed partner. Some people thrash in their sleep. Some people snore loud enough to wake the entire chamber. Some people have night terrors and wake up screaming convinced they're being attacked. Some people have digestive issues from the bean-heavy medieval diet and spend the night farting under the shared blankets. William, fortunately, is a decent bed partner. He doesn't snore much, he doesn't kick, he generates good heat. You've shared a bed with him dozens of times over the winter, and you've developed an unspoken rhythm. He knows not to steal all the blankets. You know not to press your cold feet against his legs without warning. There's a younger scribe and apprentice sleeping alone in the bed on the other side of the room. He's the newest arrival and he hasn't earned bed-sharing privileges yet. Or maybe he has, but he's too proud to ask. Either way, you can hear his teeth chattering from here. He'll learn. By midwinter, he'll be begging to share someone's bed. Pride doesn't survive prolonged cold. Some scribes share beds with their apprentices, not in a predatory way, but in a paternal way. The older scribe provides warmth and protection. The apprentice provides additional heat and, frankly, a warm body to shield the older man from the worst of the drafts. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement, though it does open the door to potential abuse. Medieval power dynamics being what they are not, every master scribe is benevolent. In peasant cottages, entire families sleep together. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents all piled into one large bed or onto a shared sleeping platform. The children are tucked in the middle where it's warmest. The adults take the edges, acting as insulation. It's a different world from the relative privacy you have as a scribe, but the principle is the same: shared body heat equals survival. William shifts slightly, adjusting his position. His elbow bumps your ribs. You grunt softly. He mutters an apology, barely audible, and settles again. The bed creaks. The straw crackles. The blankets rustle. And slowly, incrementally, warmth begins to accumulate in the small space between your bodies and beneath the pile of wool. It's not comfortable warmth, not the warmth of a fire or a hot bath, it's just less cold, survivable cold. Your breathing synchronizes with his without you consciously trying. In, out, in, out. Two bodies, one rhythm, generating heat in the dark. Outside, the wind picks up. Inside, under the blankets, you're holding your ground. Now let's talk about the scribes who have it worse than you. Because as cold as you are, as uncomfortable as this bed-sharing arrangement might be, at least you're not bound by monastic rules. At least you're allowed to prioritize survival over spiritual discipline. Monastery scribes, the brothers copying sacred texts in scriptoria, attached to abbeys, and priories they're operating under a completely different set of constraints, and those constraints in winter can kill. Monastic life is built on the Benedictine rule established back in the 6th century by St. Benedict of Nursia. It's a comprehensive guide to communal religious life, covering everything from prayer schedules to how much wine a monk should drink at dinner. And it has very specific things to say about sleeping arrangements: individual cells, modest furnishings, minimal comfort. The body is a distraction from the soul, so the body must be disciplined, denied, kept in a state of productive discomfort. If you're a monk scribe, someone who's taken vows and lives in a monastery spending your days copying scripture, your sleeping situation is technically more private than the communal barracks we've been discussing. You get your own cell. A small room, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, carved into the monastery's dormitory wing. Stone walls, a narrow door, sometimes a tiny window, sometimes not. Inside, a wooden bed frame, a thin straw mattress, 2 blankets, maybe 3 if the abbot is feeling generous or if the monastery is wealthy, a crucifix on the wall, a small shelf for your prayer book. That's it. No hearth, no brazier, no source of heat whatsoever except your own body. The monastic ideal is that suffering brings you closer to God. Cold is suffering. Therefore cold is spiritually beneficial. You're supposed to embrace it, offer it up as penance, use it to mortify the flesh and elevate the spirit. When you wake at midnight for matins, the night prayer service that all monks must attend, you're supposed to feel that cold in your bones, that stiffness in your joints. It's a reminder that earthly comfort is temporary and meaningless. Only heaven matters. In practice, this means monks freeze, not metaphorically, literally. Historical records from medieval monasteries include accounts of monks dying in their cells during particularly harsh winters, respiratory infections that turn into pneumonia, hypothermia setting in slowly over weeks, chilblains, painful inflammation of the fingers and toes caused by repeated exposure to cold that become infected and led to sepsis. Historians still argue whether the Benedictine rule's emphasis on austerity was meant to be this extreme or whether later interpretations took things too far. Some scholars point to passages in the rule that allow for practical accommodations, warmer clothing for the sick, extra blankets for the elderly. Others argue that monastic culture became increasingly ascetic over the centuries, competing to see who could endure the most hardship. Either way, if you're a monk scribe, you're sleeping alone. No bed sharing. That's explicitly forbidden. The rule is very clear. Each monk sleeps in his own bed, clothed ready to rise at a moment's notice for prayer. Sharing a bed would be seen as a lapse in discipline at best, a temptation to sin at worst. So you're on your own, in your cell, with your 2 thin blankets. And when the bell rings at midnight, a harsh clanging sound that echoes through the stone corridors, you have to get up. Immediately. No lingering under the covers. No, just 5 more minutes. You rise, you pull on your sandals, yes sandals, even in winter, because boots are a comfort the rule doesn't permit, and you shuffle through the dark corridors to the church for an hour of chanted prayers. Then back to your cell, back into the cold bed where any warmth you'd managed to accumulate is now gone. And you try to sleep again before Lord's at dawn. This happens every single night, year round. But in winter, it's a form of slow torture. Some monasteries are stricter than others. Cistercian houses, for example, prided themselves on their austerity. Founded in the late 11th century as a reform movement within Benedictine monasticism, the Cistercians rejected what they saw as the corruption and luxury of older monastic orders. They built their abbeys in remote locations, valleys, forests, marshlands, deliberately choosing places that were difficult and uncomfortable. And they slept in unheated dormitories, with minimal bedding as a point of spiritual pride. Cluniac monasteries, on the other hand, were a bit softer. The Cluniacs emphasized liturgical beauty and elaborate ritual. Their churches were decorated, their vestments were fine, and crucially, their sleeping arrangements were slightly less punishing. A Cluniac monk might have 3 blankets instead of 2. The dormitory might have shutters on the windows instead of just open slits. But even in the softer monasteries, you're still cold. You're still alone. You're still waking multiple times per night to pray in an unheated stone church. And if you complain, if you ask for an extra blanket, if you try to stay in bed when the bell rings, you're subject to discipline. Public confession of your weakness, penance, extra fasting. The abbot reminding you that Christ suffered far worse on the cross, so who are you to complain about a little cold? Some monks don't survive, the old ones especially. Men in their 60s or 70s who've spent decades in these conditions, their bodies worn down by years of inadequate nutrition and chronic cold exposure. One harsh winter is all it takes. They go to bed one night and don't wake up. The other monks find them in the morning stiff under their thin blankets, and there's a funeral and a replacement is recruited and life goes on. The younger monks, the ones still in their 20s or 30s, usually survive, but they pay a price: chronic joint pain, respiratory problems that never quite go away, a persistent cough that lasts from November to March every single year, fingers that don't grip the quill as steadily as they used to because the nerves have been damaged by repeated exposure to cold, and yet the manuscripts they produce are extraordinary, beautifully illuminated gospels, precisely copied theological treatises, legal documents, and liturgical texts that will survive for centuries. There's something almost perverse about it, these men suffering in freezing cells, their fingers numb, their bodies shaking, and still producing work of incredible precision and artistry. Maybe the cold sharpens focus. Maybe suffering really does clarify the mind, strip away distraction, force you to concentrate on the work, because the work is the only thing that makes the suffering meaningful. Or maybe it's just that monks didn't have a choice. You do the work or you're expelled from the monastery, you endure the cold or you die. There's a brutal simplicity to it. You lying in your shared bed in the castle scriptorium are grateful you're not a monk. You've made a different deal, secular employment instead of sacred vows. It means you don't get the monk's spiritual rewards, whatever those are, salvation you suppose though. You're not entirely sure how that's calculated, but it also means you get an extra 3 blankets and a warm body next to yours. William's back is still radiating heat into your chest. The blankets are heavy on top of you. You're cold, yes, but you're not monk-level cold. You're not alone in a cell with 2 thin coverings and a crucifix staring down at you. You close your eyes and feel something that might be gratitude, or maybe just relief that things could be worse, because they always can be. Before you actually try to sleep, there are rituals, things you do to give yourself the best possible chance of surviving the night without waking up frozen and miserable. These aren't official protocols written down in any manual. They're accumulated wisdom passed from older scribes to younger ones, little tricks and techniques that make the difference between a terrible night and a merely bad one. First, the evening meal. What you eat before bed matters more than you might think. Your body is a furnace and food is fuel. A full stomach means more calories to burn through the night, more metabolic heat generation. So the evening meal eaten maybe an hour before retiring is crucial. It's not elaborate, this is a castle scriptorium, not a noble's feast, but it's substantial. Tonight it's pottage. Of course it's pottage, it's always pottage. A thick stew made from whatever's available, dried peas or beans soaked and boiled, until soft some onions, maybe a bit of salted pork if you're lucky, herbs, if the kitchen staff is feeling generous. It's served in wooden bowls, still steaming, and you eat it with a wooden spoon and a hunk of dark bread for dipping. The pottage is hot. That's the key. You're not just consuming calories, you're consuming heat. The warm liquid goes down into your stomach and radiates outward. For maybe 20 or 30 minutes after eating, you feel genuinely warm. It's temporary, but it's glorious. You savour it. You know the warmth won't last, but while it does, it's like having a small fire burning in your core. Some scribes add extra fat to their evening meal if they can get it. A spoonful of lard stirred into the pottage, a bit of butter on the bread. Fat is calorie-dense and it burns slowly, releasing energy over hours instead of minutes. If you can get your hands on it, you eat it. The castle's kitchen staff controls access to these resources, and they're not always generous with scribes. But if you've done someone a favour, copied a letter for a cook's brother, maybe you might get a bit extra ladled into your bowl. Drink matters too. Some scribes swear by warm ale before bed. Not the strong stuff, just small beer. The weak, slightly fermented beverage that everyone drinks because the water isn't always safe. Warm it up by the kitchen fire, maybe add some honey if you can afford it, and drink it down just before heading to your sleeping quarters. The warmth is pleasant and the mild alcohol content might help you relax into sleep more easily. Others prefer warmed wine. Wine is more expensive than ale, so this is less common among working scribes, but some castles provide it. Heat it with spices, cinnamon, cloves, a bit of ginger, and you've got what will eventually be called mulled wine. The spices are thought to have warming properties according to medieval medical theory. Ginger especially is considered hot. In the humoral system, it balances out the cold and moist properties of winter air. Historians still argue about how much medieval people actually understood nutrition and metabolism, but they definitely understood cause and effect. Eat hot food before bed, sleep better. Drink warm beverages, feel warmer. Skip dinner, suffer all night. The mechanism might have been mysterious, but the results were observable. After eating, there's the matter of warming your bed. This is where things get creative. The ideal solution is a bed warmer, a long-handled metal pan with a lid filled with hot coals from the fire that you slide between the sheets to heat them before climbing in. It's basically a medieval heating pad. The wealthy have these. You don't. Bed warmers are expensive and they're fire hazards. One carelessly placed hot coal could set your straw mattress ablaze. But there are alternatives. Some scribes heat stones in the kitchen fire, smooth river rocks about the size of a fist, wrap them in cloth and tuck them into bed. The stones retain heat for hours. You position them near your feet, which are always the coldest part of your body, and they radiate warmth. By morning, the stones are cold, but for the first few hours of the night, they're miraculous. You don't have a stone tonight. You forgot to heat one before leaving the kitchen. Rookie mistake. You'll regret it around midnight when your toes are numb. Another technique: pre-warm your blankets by the fire. If there's a hearth anywhere near your sleeping quarters, maybe in the scriptorium itself, or in a nearby hall, you can drape one of your blankets near it for 10 or 15 minutes before bed. Not close enough to scorch or catch fire, just close enough to absorb warmth. Then you carry it quickly to your bed and burrow under it before the heat dissipates. It's a small thing, but small things matter. Then there are the prayers. Even if you're not particularly devout, and plenty of scribes are more mercenary than mystical, copying religious texts for pay without much personal faith, you probably say something before sleep. A quick paternoster, a plea to St. Agatha, patron saint of cold weather, or St. Sebastian invoked against plague and illness. It's part superstition, part habit, part genuine hope that someone somewhere might be listening and might care whether you freeze to death tonight. William is already murmuring his prayers beside you. You can't make out the words, but the rhythm is familiar. Latin phrases memorized from childhood repeated automatically. You add your own half-whispered Pater Noster quies in caelis, Our Father who art in heaven. You're not sure heaven is paying attention to a cold scribe in a draughty castle, but it can't hurt to ask. Some scribes engage in more elaborate pre-sleep rituals. They rub their hands and feet with rendered animal fat tallow or lard to create a barrier against the cold. The fat doesn't actually generate warmth, but it does reduce moisture loss through the skin, which helps with heat retention. It's greasy and unpleasant, but it works. You've tried it a few times. Tonight you're too tired. Others do stretches or simple exercises before bed, not vigorous enough to cause sweating, but enough to get blood flowing to the extremities. Flex your fingers, rotate your ankles, roll your shoulders. Increase circulation before immobilizing yourself under the blankets. Some scribes swear this helps. Others think it's nonsense. You settle for tucking your hands under your armpits and wiggling your toes inside your woolen hose, trying to generate a bit of warmth through friction. The room is darkening. The last candle, a tallow stub burning in a wall sconce, is guttering. Someone will extinguish it soon. Fire risk again. You can't leave flames burning unattended overnight, not in a room full of straw mattresses and wool blankets. So once that candle goes out, you'll be in complete darkness. No night lights, no ambient glow from street lamps outside. There are no street lamps, just blackness. You adjust your sleeping cap one more time. You make sure your blankets are tucked tight around your shoulders, no gaps for drafts to sneak through. You press yourself closer to William's back, seeking his warmth. The rituals are complete. The preparations are done. There's nothing left to do now but endure the night, and hope quietly that morning comes before the cold wins. Now let's talk about the hearth problem. Because you might be wondering, why not just keep a fire burning all night? Why not maintain that beautiful life-giving warmth until dawn? And the answer is it's complicated. Actually, it's more than complicated. It's nearly impossible for most people. And even when it's possible, it comes with trade-offs that are sometimes worse than just accepting the cold. The Great Hall downstairs, the main public space of the castle, does have a massive hearth. It's the social and thermal centre of the entire structure. During the day and through the evening meal, it roars with logs the size of your torso. Oak, beech, whatever hardwood the castle's foresters have been stockpiling. The fire throws heat across the hall, and for those few hours after dinner standing near it is almost pleasant. You can actually feel your fingers. Your face stops aching from the cold. It's civilization contained in flames. But maintaining a fire that size requires constant fuel. A proper hall fire can consume a cartload of wood in a single day, and would, despite what you might think in an era before fossil fuels, is not unlimited. Medieval Europe is already experiencing deforestation from centuries of clearing land for agriculture, construction and fuel. The forests are retreating. Wood is becoming more expensive. Castle stewards are acutely aware of how much they're burning. So when the evening ends, when the lord and his household retire to their private chambers, when the servants finish cleaning, the fire gets banked. This is a specific technique. You rake the burning logs apart, spread them out, then cover them with a thick layer of ash. The ash cuts off most of the oxygen supply, slowing combustion to a crawl. The coals underneath stay hot, barely glowing, producing minimal heat but staying alive. In the morning you can uncover them, add kindling, blow on them, and restart the fire without needing to generate new flame from scratch. Flint and steel work, but they're finicky and time-consuming. Banking a fire overnight is more efficient, but a banked fire doesn't heat anything. It's in survival mode, not production mode. The Great Hall, which was warm, relatively warm at 9 in the evening, is cold by midnight. All that accumulated warmth rises to the vaulted ceiling and dissipates. By morning the hall is barely warmer than the outside air, and you're not in the hall anyway. You're upstairs in the scriptorium quarters, no fire, no coals, nothing. Could you have your own fire? Theoretically, yes. Some individual chambers in castles do have small fireplaces, but here's the problem. Building a fireplace isn't just about digging a hole and stacking stones. You need a proper chimney. A flue that vents smoke outside without filling the room. And chimneys are architectural features that require planning, skilled masonry, and structural integration into the castle's design. They're expensive. They're not added casually. The Lord's Solar has a fireplace because the Lord is important. The lady's chamber has one because she's important. Maybe the castle's marshal or the head of the household staff gets one. Scribes know. You're clerks. You're useful, but you're not fireplace-worthy. Some castles do have communal braziers, small metal or ceramic vessels that hold burning charcoal. These are portable heat sources, and they're used in spaces like the scriptorium during working hours. But at night, they're extinguished. Absolutely non-negotiably extinguished. Because a brazier full of hot coals in a room where people are sleeping, where straw mattresses and wool blankets are everywhere, where someone might accidentally knock it over or a spark might escape, that's not a heating solution, that's a death sentence. Medieval cities regularly burned. Not metaphorically, literally burned entire neighbourhoods consumed in hours because someone's hearth fire spread to thatched roofing, or because a candle tipped over, or because coals from a cooking fire weren't properly extinguished. Castle stewards know this. They're paranoid about fire. So the rule is absolute no open flames overnight in sleeping quarters. Period. Historians still argue whether this rule was universally enforced or whether people cheated, hiding a small brazier under their bed, gambling that they could keep it controlled. Some probably did. Some probably died. As a result, their bodies burned beyond recognition, their deaths recorded in monastic chronicles, as warnings about the sin of disobedience. You're not taking that risk. No fire means no fire. But let's say you're a more important person. Let's say you're a senior scribe who's earned a private alcove, and let's say that alcove happens to be adjacent to a kitchen, or a room where a fire is legitimately kept burning overnight for some reason. You'd think you could benefit from radiant heat through the wall, right? Warmth, seeping through stone doesn't conduct heat well. It's one of stone's defining properties, low thermal conductivity. That's why castles are cold in the first place. A 3-foot thick stone wall with a fire on one side and you on the other. You might feel a faint, barely perceptible increase in temperature if you press your hand directly against the stone. Maybe. But it's not going to warm the room. It's not going to save you. Some castles have hypocausts, those Roman underfloor heating systems we mentioned earlier. Hot air from a furnace circulates through channels beneath the floor, warming the rooms above. A few wealthy monasteries and castles maintained these systems through the medieval period, but they're vanishingly rare and staggeringly expensive to operate. You need someone tending the furnace all night. You need a steady supply of fuel. You need a structure specifically designed to accommodate the system. Most castles don't have this. Yours certainly doesn't. So what you're left with is this: when you go to bed, whatever warmth exists in your body and in your immediate environment is all you're going to have until morning. There's no resupply, no reinforcements. The cold is sieging you, and your under siege conditions survive on what you've got or don't survive at all. This is why the evening meal matters. Why the warm pottage matters. Why pulling the blankets tight and sharing body heat matters. You're a closed system now. The only energy input is your own metabolism converting food into heat. Everything else is just insulation trying to slow the inevitable loss. Some nights are worse than others. If it's merely cold outside, say 20 or 30 degrees, you can make it through. Uncomfortable, yes, but survivable. If it's truly frigid, single digits below zero, the castle interior might drop into the teens. At that point, 5 wool blankets and a bedmate might not be enough. You might wake every hour, shivering so violently your teeth crack together, unable to fall back into deep sleep because your body is in distress. Those are the nights when people die. Not dramatically, not suddenly. But the old scribe in the corner, the one with the persistent cough, the one who's been losing weight all winter, he might not wake up. His heart, stressed by cold, and by the effort of maintaining core temperature, might simply stop. And in the morning, someone will find him stiff and pale under his thin blankets, and there will be a funeral and life will continue. You're young enough that you'll probably survive. Probably. But you understand, lying here in the dark with William's warmth at your back, that sleep in a medieval castle is not rest. It's endurance. It's a nightly battle that you have to win over and over until spring finally arrives and releases you from this frozen siege. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, the darkness is absolute. And the hearth, that distant, banked, useless hearth in the great hall below, might as well be on another continent for all the good it does you now. Here's something that might surprise you. You're not actually going to sleep for 8 straight hours. That's not how medieval people slept. That's not even how humans naturally sleep, when left to their own devices without electric lights and alarm clocks and the tyranny of 9-to-5 schedules. You're going to sleep in segments. 2 distinct periods separated by an hour or more of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. This is called biphasic sleep or segmented sleep, and it was the default human sleep pattern for most of history. You fall asleep sometime after dark, let's say around 9 or 10 in the evening. You sleep for 3 or 4 hours, then you wake up. Naturally. Not because something disturbed you, but because your brain has completed a full sleep cycle and is surfacing into consciousness. This is first sleep or first watch, and then around midnight or 1 in the morning you are awake, fully awake, eyes open in the darkness. William beside you is still asleep, his breathing steady. Across the room you can hear someone else stirring, another scribe experiencing the same phenomenon. This isn't insomnia. This isn't a sleep disorder. This is normal. What do you do during this wakeful period? Well, that depends. Some people pray. The middle of the night was considered a spiritually significant time, quiet, dark, closer to God somehow. You might lie there in the darkness and recite prayers you've memorized. A rosary if you're devout. Contemplation of your sins. Gratitude for surviving another day. The usual conversations people have with the divine when there's nothing else to do. Others use this time for more practical matters. You might need to relieve yourself. Chamber pots exist, but they're communal and usually kept in a corner of the room or just outside in the corridor. Getting up means leaving the warm cocoon of blankets, exposing yourself to the frigid air, fumbling in the dark toward the pot, and then enduring the shock of cold porcelain against your skin. It's unpleasant enough that some people hold it waiting until morning. But if you can't wait, this wakeful period is when you go. Some scribes use the time to check their sleeping space. Is a blanket slipping off? Adjust it. Are your feet exposed and going numb? Tuck them back in. Is the sleeping cap coming loose? Retie it. These small maintenance tasks are easier to handle during the wakeful period than in the deeper phases of sleep, when you're less aware of your body's position and condition. And some people talk. Quietly, so as not to wake those who are still in their first sleep, but talk nonetheless. If William wakes up around the same time you do, you might have a brief whispered conversation. Nothing profound, just quiet observations about the cold, speculation about tomorrow's weather, maybe a shared complaint about the quality of tonight's pottage. These midnight conversations are intimate in a strange way. There's no social performance, no need to maintain the professional demeanour you'd have during the day. Just 2 humans awake in the dark, acknowledging each other's presence. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was universal, or whether it varied by region and social class. Most of the documentary evidence comes from legal depositions, personal letters, and literary references that casually mention first sleep and second sleep, as if everyone knew what those terms meant. And they did. It wasn't until artificial lighting became common, first with oil lamps, then gas, then electricity, that humans began consolidating sleep into a single long block. We trained ourselves out of our natural pattern. But you're in 1350. There's no artificial lighting beyond candles and rushlight, and those are expensive and dangerous to burn all night. So when you wake after your first sleep, you're waking into absolute darkness. And I mean absolute. Not dark room with a little light leaking under the door darkness. Not night vision kicks in after a few minutes darkness. Absolute total oppressive blackness. The kind of dark where you can hold your hand an inch from your face and see nothing. This darkness is disorienting. Without visual reference points, your sense of space becomes unstable. You know intellectually that you're in your bed in the scriptorium quarters with stone walls around you, But your lizard brain evolved to fear the dark because the dark contained predators isn't entirely convinced. The darkness feels active, like it's pressing in on you, like it has weight and presence. Some people find this terrifying, others find it oddly peaceful. You're somewhere in between. You've been doing this long enough that you're used to it, but you never quite relax into it. The darkness is tolerable, not comfortable. During this wakeful period, your body's doing something interesting, it's adjusting. Your metabolism shifts. Your core temperature, which dropped slightly during first sleep, stabilizes. If you've been lying in one position for hours, this is when you naturally shift roll over redistribute pressure on your joints. It's maintenance mode for your body, a natural intermission in the night's performance. Some scholars think this wakeful period had evolutionary advantages. In a dangerous world, predators, enemies, threats in the night, having at least one member of a sleeping group wake periodically could have been protective. Someone's always on watch, even if they don't consciously think of it that way. You lie there in the dark, listening. Is that sound just the wind? Is someone moving in the hallway? Is everything safe? Your unconscious mind is running threat assessments, while your conscious mind is praying or thinking or just floating in the dark. After an hour or so, sometimes less, sometimes more, you feel sleep returning. It's a gradual thing, a gentle pulling down sensation. Your thoughts start to drift. Your body relaxes. William is still asleep beside you, his warmth a constant presence. The cold is still there, pressing in from all sides, but you've reached a kind of equilibrium with it. It's not comfortable, but it's bearable, and then you slip back under. Second sleep begins. This phase usually lasts until dawn, another 3 or 4 hours. It's often deeper than first sleep, more restorative. Your body knows it's running out of time, morning is coming, the day's demands are coming, so it makes the most of these final hours. Not everyone wakes during the night. Some people, especially the young and the exhausted, sleep straight through from evening until dawn. But most adults experience this segmented pattern, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. It's just how human sleep works in the absence of modern interventions. You lie there feeling sleep approaching and you're grateful. Not for comfort, there is no comfort, but for the simple fact that your body still knows how to do this. How to slip back into unconsciousness, despite the cold, despite the hardness of the mattress, despite the darkness pressing down. The wind outside has died down. The castle is silent except for the distant sound of a guard's footsteps on the battlements, steady, rhythmic, reassuring in their regularity. Someone's awake and watching. Someone's standing between you and whatever's out there in the night. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts fragment into nonsense. And somewhere in that fragmentation, sleep catches you and pulls you down into second sleep, into the deeper dark, into the place where cold doesn't matter and morning is just a distant promise that you'll believe in when you wake. Let's talk about the nights when sleep isn't enough. The nights when work demands you stay awake, when deadlines press, when a castle administrator needs documents copied by morning, and you're the scribe who drew the short straw. Because sometimes staying warm isn't your biggest problem. Sometimes your biggest problem is trying to work with frozen fingers by the guttering light of a single candle, while the rest of the castle sleeps. Night work happens. It's not common, candles are expensive, and scribble work requires good light for accuracy, but it happens. A legal document that must be ready for a visiting official at dawn, a letter that needs to leave with a messenger at first light, an urgent copy of a contract. Whatever the reason, sometimes you don't get to sleep. Sometimes you sit at your desk in the scriptorium alone or with one other unlucky scribe and you work through the darkest hours. The scriptorium at night is a different place. During the day it's full of people, scribes at their desks, apprentices running errands, the master scribe making rounds, checking work, offering corrections. There's conversation low and professional but present. There's the communal sound of quills scratching parchment, a kind of rhythmic white noise. There's the sense of being part of something, a collective enterprise. At night, it's just you and the silence, and the cold, always the cold. You're sitting at your wooden writing desk, a slanted surface that puts the parchment at a comfortable angle for copying. During the day, natural light comes through the scriptorium's narrow windows. At night, you have a candle. One single tallow candle in a simple iron holder positioned to your left if you're right-handed so your writing hand doesn't cast a shadow on the text. Tallow candles smell. They're made from rendered animal fat, beef or mutton, and when they burn they produce a thick greasy smoke and an odour that's somewhere between cooking meat and burning hair. It's not pleasant, but tallow is cheaper than beeswax, which burns clean and smells faintly sweet. Beeswax is for churches and nobles. You get tallow. The candle's flame is small, flickering, inadequate. It illuminates maybe a 2-foot circle of workspace. Beyond that, darkness. The rest of the scriptorium, the shelves of manuscripts, the other desks, the far walls, exists only as vague shapes in the peripheral blackness. You feel isolated, like you're working in a small bubble of light floating in an infinite void. And it's cold. Colder than your sleeping quarters, even because at least in bed you have blankets and possibly a bedmate. Here you're sitting still, not moving except for the small motions of your hand holding the quill. Your body isn't generating much heat through activity. Your metabolism is trying to keep your core warm, which means your extremities, fingers, toes, nose are being sacrificed. Your fingers go numb within the first hour. Not completely numb, but that pins and needles sensation, the feeling of your digits becoming clumsy and unresponsive. This is a disaster for scribal work. You need fine motor control. You need to be able to hold the quill at precise angles to regulate pressure to form letters with consistent size and spacing. Numb fingers make you slow. They make you sloppy. They make you prone to mistakes. Some scribes keep a small brazier of hot coals near their desk when working at night, not for general warmth, but specifically to warm their hands periodically. You don't have that luxury tonight, so instead you stop every 10 or 15 minutes and tuck your hands under your armpits, or you breathe on them, or you rub them together vigorously trying to force blood back into the capillaries. It helps temporarily. Then you pick up the quill and continue, and within minutes the numbness returns. The ink is a problem too. Medieval ink is made from oak galls, those weird growths that form on oak trees when insects lay eggs mixed with iron salts, and a binding agent like gum arabic. It's a complex chemical recipe that produces a dark, durable ink that won't fade for centuries, but it's water-based, and when the temperature drops, water becomes sluggish, viscous. Sometimes it begins to freeze. Your inkhorn, a small container carved from actual horns sealed at one end, sits on your desk. You can feel that the ink inside is thickening. When you dip your quill, it comes up with ink that flows too slowly, that clots, that doesn't spread smoothly across the parchment. You're getting uneven lines, blotches, moments where the flow stops entirely and you have to re-dip. Some scribes dilute their ink with wine or weak ale. In winter, the alcohol lowers the freezing point. Others keep the inkhorn tucked inside their clothing against their body so their core heat keeps it liquid. You're doing neither. You're fighting with stubborn ink and hoping you don't ruin the parchment. Parchment itself is expensive. It's made from stretched, scraped animal skin, usually calf, sheep or goat. Preparing parchment takes days of labour-soaking, scraping, stretching, treating with lime drying. A single sheet represents significant cost. If you make a major error, a blotted line, a skipped word, a misspelled name, you can sometimes scrape it away with a knife and write over it. But if you ruin a sheet completely, that's a problem. That's a financial loss that the castle steward will notice. That's a black mark against your professional reputation. So you work slowly, carefully, even though your fingers are numb, even though your back aches from hunching over the desk, even though your eyes are straining in the inadequate candlelight trying to read the exemplar text you're copying from. Historians still argue whether medieval scribes suffered from repetitive strain injuries, what we'd call carpal tunnel syndrome, or similar conditions. The evidence is sparse, but there are marginal notes in manuscripts complaining about hand pain, about stiffness, about fingers that won't flex properly. Some scribes worked for decades. Their hands paid the price, the cold makes it worse. Cold tightens, muscles stiffens, joints reduces flexibility. You can feel it in your wrist, in your knuckles. Every letter is slightly harder to form than it would be in warmth. And there's another problem, your candle is dying. Tallow candles don't last long, maybe an hour per candle, depending on size and quality. You've been given 2 candles for the night. The first is guttering now, the flame sinking into a pool of melted tallow. You light the second from the first before it goes out completely. The brief moment between candles when you're holding the new one to the old flame and waiting for it to catch is tense. If the flame goes out, you're in darkness. You'd have to fumble your way to the kitchen or the great hall, find someone with a fire or Coles beg for a light. Minutes wasted. Maybe a ruined night's work if you can't find a flame. The second candle catches. The light resumes. You return to work. Outside, it's the deepest part of night, the hours between midnight and dawn, when the world feels like it's holding its breath. There's no sound except your quill on parchment, the occasional crackle of the candle, your own breathing. The cold presses in. The darkness surrounds your small circle of light, and you copy line by line, word by word, because this is what scribes do. This is the job. This is the cost of literacy in a world where most people can't read their own names. By the time dawn begins to grey the scriptorium windows, you're done. The document is complete, your fingers are nearly useless, your eyes are burning, your back feels like it's been twisted into knots. But the work is finished. You blow out the candle stub, you flex your hands wincing at the pain, and you realise with a kind of hollow exhaustion that you now have to face the full day's work ahead with no sleep. But at least you'll be doing it in daylight. At least there will be other people around. At least the work will keep you moving, generating a little body heat. Tonight, the next night, you'll sleep, probably. Unless there's another urgent document, unless the cycle begins again. Now let's talk about the animals. Because you're not the only living thing trying to survive the cold. And some of those other living things have figured out that humans, despite being hairless and weak, are excellent sources of heat. So they've invited themselves into your sleeping arrangements, or you've invited them. The distinction gets blurry when survival is on the line. Dogs are the most common bedmates. Not lapdogs, those are for nobles, small decorative breeds that serve no practical purpose, beyond being petted. The dogs in a castle are working animals, hunting hounds, guard dogs, ratters. They're medium to large-sized with thick coats, and during the day they patrol the grounds, chase vermin, or follow their masters on hunts. At night they sleep wherever they can find warmth, and if you're willing to share your bed, they're more than happy to join you. Tonight there's a dog at the foot of your bed, a brown hunting hound, maybe 60 pounds, with a coarse coat that smells like wet fur and the outdoors. You don't know his name, he's not your dog, he belongs to the castle's master of hounds, or maybe to one of the knights. But he's learned that the scribes' quarters are warmer than the kennels outside and nobody's kicked him out yet, so he's claimed a spot on your bed. He's lying curled up at your feet, his body a compact ball of fur and muscle. And he's warm, genuinely, significantly warm. Dogs have higher body temperatures than humans, around 101 or 102 degrees Fahrenheit compared to your 98.6. That extra heat radiates outward, and right now it's keeping your feet from going completely numb. You can feel it through the wool blankets, through your hose. It's not enough to make you comfortable, but it's enough to make a difference. Some scribes consider this undignified. Dogs are animals. They smell. They have fleas. Sharing your bed with one is uncouth somehow. But those scribes usually change their minds after a few nights of waking up with frozen toes. Dignity doesn't keep you warm. A 60-pound hound does. The dog shifts, occasionally adjusting his position. And when he does, you feel the loss of heat immediately. You actually find yourself hoping he doesn't move too much. You've become dependent on his presence in a way that would have seemed absurd back in summer when the nights were mild and sleeping alone was perfectly fine. Historians still argue whether medieval people felt genuine affection for their working animals or viewed them purely as tools. The evidence suggests it varied. Some people loved their dogs, gave them names, mourned when they died. Others were more pragmatic, seeing dogs as resources to be used and replaced when necessary. But regardless of emotional attachment, everyone recognised the practical value of canine body heat. Cats are another option, though they're less reliable. Cats are smaller, so they generate less heat. And cats have an annoying habit of deciding to leave in the middle of the night, taking their warmth with them just when you need it most. But if a cat does curl up on your chest or against your stomach, the warmth is concentrated and lovely. You can feel the vibration of their purring, a strange rhythmic buzzing that's oddly soothing. Some medieval people believed that a cat's purr had healing properties. It probably doesn't, but the comfort is real regardless. The problem with cats is that they're often out hunting at night. Castles are full of mice and rats, and cats are the primary pest control system. So the castle cats are frequently elsewhere, stalking through storerooms and stables doing their job. You can't count on them being available when you need warmth. Some people share beds with chickens. Yes, chickens. In peasant cottages, especially where the line between human living space and animal living space is thin, chickens sometimes roost inside at night. They're not great bed partners, they're flighty, they make noise, they poop, but they're warm. And their eggs are valuable, so keeping them safe from foxes and other predators by bringing them inside makes economic sense. You're in a castle, though not a cottage. Chickens in the scribes' quarters would be absurd. The master scribe would never allow it. So you don't have chickens. But you've heard stories from scribes who grew up in rural areas, and apparently chicken sharing was common enough that it didn't warrant special mention. In truly desperate circumstances, the coldest nights of the deepest winter, some people resort to even stranger arrangements. Goats brought inside, pigs kept near the sleeping area. Any warm-blooded creature large enough to produce significant heat becomes a potential ally against the cold. The smell is awful. The hygiene is questionable, But when the alternative is freezing to death, you make compromises. The dog at your feet snores. It's a soft snuffling sound accompanied by the occasional twitch of his legs, dreaming probably of chasing rabbits across summer fields. You find the sound comforting. It's proof of life, of warmth, of a beating heart that isn't your own. In the absolute silence and darkness of the night, these small sounds matter. There's an intimacy to sleeping with animals that's hard to explain to someone from a more sanitized era. You're sharing space with another species. You can smell them, feel their warmth, hear their breathing. You're reminded that you're not alone in the struggle to survive. These creatures are fighting the same battle you're trying to maintain body temperature, trying to make it until dawn. Some medieval writers, particularly monks, wrote disapprovingly of people who slept with animals. They saw it as a sign of moral degradation, a blurring of the boundaries God had established between humans and beasts. There were even church edicts in some regions forbidding clergy from sleeping with dogs or cats. The reasoning was partly about maintaining dignity and partly about preventing, well, the church had concerns about what might happen when humans and animals got too close. But practical people, which included most working scribes, ignored these concerns. The church could prohibit whatever it wanted. The church wasn't going to keep your feet warm at 3 a.m. when the temperature inside the castle had dropped to 20 degrees. The dog would. You flex your toes, feeling them press against the dog's warm bulk through the blankets. He doesn't move, doesn't wake. He's found his spot and he's settled in for the duration. Good. You're allies in this. You provide him with a slightly warmer sleeping platform than the stone floor. He provides you with supplemental heat. It's a fair exchange. Tomorrow during the day he'll probably ignore you completely. He'll be off doing dog things and you'll be at your desk doing scribe things and there won't be any acknowledgement of the nighttime arrangement. That's fine. This isn't about companionship, it's about survival. But for now, in the deep middle of the night, you're grateful. Grateful for the weight at your feet, for the warmth seeping through the blankets, for the soft snoring that fills the silence. Grateful that evolution gave dogs thick coats and high body temperatures, and that some ancient ancestor of yours figured out that humans and dogs could help each other through the cold. The wind picks up outside, whistling through the arrow slits. The dog doesn't stir, neither does William beside you, and you wedged between one human and one canine heat source, feel your chances of surviving until morning improve considerably. Small mercies. That's what medieval life is built on. Small mercies and practical compromises and the warmth of any living thing willing to share it. Let's talk about the ones who have it worst. Because in the hierarchy of cold and suffering there's always a bottom. And at the bottom are the children, the apprentices, the young boys usually between 10 and 14 years old, who've been sent to the castle to learn the scribal trade, who have no power, no resources, and no one particularly invested in keeping them comfortable. Medieval apprenticeship was a form of labour exploitation dressed up as education. That's harsh, but it's true. A peasant family with too many sons and not enough land would send one boy to learn a trade. They'd pay a fee to the master scribe sometimes, a significant sum, sometimes just a promise of service. The boy would live and work in the castle, learning to prepare parchment mixing copy simple texts. In exchange, he'd receive food, shelter and training. In theory, it was a path to a better life. In practice, it was often brutal. The apprentice sleeping in the corner, let's call him Thomas. A common enough name is 12 years old. He arrived at the castle 6 months ago. His father is a freeman farmer prosperous enough to afford the apprenticeship fee, but not prosperous enough to spare much sympathy for a younger son. Thomas was told he was lucky. A trade meant security. Literacy meant respect. He should be grateful. Thomas is not grateful. Thomas is cold. His sleeping spot is the worst in the room, the corner by the door where every draught hits first and hardest. He has the thinnest mattress, the oldest blankets, the smallest allocation of resources. This isn't accidental. This is the system working as intended. Apprentices are at the bottom. They haven't earned better treatment. They have to prove themselves first. Thomas's mattress is barely a mattress. It's a cloth sack with maybe 6 inches of compressed straw that hasn't been changed in over a year. When he lies down, he can feel the rope lattice through the thin padding. His back aches constantly. He's 12 and his back aches like an old man's. He has 2 blankets. Both are thin wool worn through in places patched multiple times. They were probably hand-me-downs from adult scribes who got newer blankets. The patches are rough, the weave is loose, and they don't provide nearly enough insulation. On the coldest nights, Thomas shivers so hard he can't sleep. He just lies there, teeth chattering, muscles clenching, waiting for dawn. He doesn't have a bedmate. The adult scribes pair up with each other equals sharing warmth, but Thomas is not an equal. He's an apprentice. Pairing him with an adult scribe would disrupt the social hierarchy. It would imply he's worth the same consideration as a trained copyist. He's not, so he sleeps alone. Sometimes he cries, quietly so no one hears. He's 12. He misses his mother. He misses his village. He misses sleeping in the family cottage where it was crowded but warm, where his siblings were piled around him, where his mother would check on them before bed and tuck the blankets in properly. Here no one checks on him. No one tucks him in. He's just another resource, another tool being trained for use. The adult scribes aren't deliberately cruel. They're not sadists. They're just indifferent. They were apprentices once too. They survived. Thomas will survive or he won't. That's how it works. Coddling an apprentice doesn't prepare him for the realities of the profession. Cold discomfort, long hours, minimal reward. These are features of a scribe's life, not bugs. Better he learns now. Historians still argue whether medieval childhood was fundamentally different from modern childhood, whether children were seen as small adults, rather than as a distinct category requiring special protection. The evidence is mixed. Some medieval parents clearly loved and protected their children fiercely. Others sent them away young, sometimes as young as 7, to work as servants or apprentices in other households. Childhood was shorter. Sentimentality was a luxury many couldn't afford. Thomas tries to generate warmth through movement. Before getting into bed, he does what the older scribes taught him. He flexes his hands, stamps his feet, rubs his arms. Get the blood moving. Store up as much body heat as possible before lying down. It helps a little. Not enough, but a little. He also learned another trick: breath control. If he breathes slowly and deeply consciously, pulling air deep into his lungs and exhaling completely, his body seems to generate more heat. Maybe it's the increased oxygenation. Maybe it's just that focusing on breathing distracts him from the cold. Either way, he does it. In through the nose, out through the mouth, watching his breath steam in the candlelight before the candles are extinguished. Once the room is dark, Thomas curls into the tightest ball he can manage. Knees to chest, arms wrapped around his legs, head tucked down. Minimize surface area. It's the same position a hedgehog takes when threatened. Pure instinct. His body knows what to do, even if his mind doesn't understand the thermodynamics. But even curled up, even with slow breathing, he's still cold. The blankets barely cover him, they're not quite long enough, and if he pulls them up over his shoulders, his feet are exposed. If he covers his feet, his shoulders are exposed. He has to choose. Tonight he chooses feet. His shoulder blades press against the rough wool of his tunic, absorbing cold from the air. Around midnight he wakes. His first sleep is shorter than the adults, maybe 2 hours instead of 4. His body hasn't fully adapted to the segmented sleep pattern yet, and when he wakes he's disoriented and frightened. The room is absolutely dark. He can't see anything. For a moment he doesn't remember where he is. Panic rises in his chest. Then he hears the other scribes breathing, William's heavy exhalations, the dog snoring, the soft creak of someone shifting position. He remembers. He's in the castle. He's an apprentice. He's cold, but alive. Thomas needs to urinate, badly, but getting up means leaving the minimal warmth he's accumulated under his blankets. It means exposing himself to the room's frigid air. It means fumbling in the darkness toward the chamber pot, which is somewhere near the door, hoping he doesn't trip over anything or wake anyone. He holds it as long as he can, tries to ignore the pressure, but eventually there's no choice. He peels back the blankets, the cold hits him like a slap and slides out of bed. His feet hit the stone floor. The shock is so intense, it's almost painful. He gasps, then covers his mouth, not wanting to wake anyone. He shuffles toward where he thinks the door is, hands outstretched, trying not to collide with furniture. He finds the chamber pot by nearly kicking it over, steadies it, relieves himself in the darkness, the sound embarrassingly loud in the quiet room. Someone stirs. A voice low and irritated. "Quiet, boy." "Sorry," Thomas whispers. He makes his way back to his bed, climbs under the blankets, and realizes he's now colder than when he started. The brief exposure has cost him all the warmth he'd built up. His feet are numb, his hands are shaking, and he has hours until dawn. This is when Thomas sometimes wonders if he'll die. Not dramatically, not consciously thinking, "I'm going to die tonight," but just a vague, hollow awareness that some apprentices don't make it through winter. The master scribe mentioned it once casually while reviewing Thomas's work. "You're doing better than the last boy. He didn't survive his first winter. weak constitution. Thomas doesn't want to be the boy who didn't survive. He wants to become a full scribe. He wants to sit at a proper desk, to have his own bed in a better position, to maybe someday have an apprentice of his own to boss around. But right now, shivering under 2 inadequate blankets, that future seems impossibly distant. He tries to pray, "Our Father who art in heaven," but he can't focus. The cold is too loud, too demanding. It drowns out everything else. So instead he just endures, curls tighter, breathes slowly, counts his heartbeats, waits, survives. Because that's what you do. You survive the night, and then the next one. And eventually, if you're lucky, you move up the ladder and someone else takes the spot by the door. Winter doesn't just make you uncomfortable. Winter kills. And it doesn't kill quickly or dramatically. It kills slowly, grinding you down over weeks and months until your body simply can't fight anymore. This is the part of medieval castle life that doesn't make it into the romantic retellings, the casual constant presence of death as a real possibility every single night. Let's start with the obvious hypothermia. Your core body temperature is normally around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Drop below 95 and you're in mild hypothermia, shivering, confused, clumsy. Drop to 90 and you're in moderate hypothermia, shivering, stop speech, slurs, you can't think clearly. Below 82, you're in severe hypothermia, and you're probably going to die without intervention. An intervention in 1350 means hoping someone notices you're in trouble and knows to warm you gradually. In a castle bedroom where the temperature might drop into the 20s Fahrenheit on the coldest nights, maintaining a 98-degree core temperature is an active battle. Your body is burning calories constantly, trying to generate enough metabolic heat to stay alive. If you're well-fed, healthy, young, and have adequate insulation blankets, clothing, a bedmate, you can probably win that battle. But if any of those factors fail, if you're undernourished, if you're sick, if your blankets are inadequate, you start losing ground. The dangerous thing about hypothermia is that it sneaks up on you. The early stages actually feel almost pleasant. You stop shivering. You feel warm, even euphoric. There's a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, where hypothermic people take off their clothes because they feel too hot. They're not hot, they're dying, but their body's temperature regulation system has failed so completely that the signals are reversed. Medieval people didn't understand the mechanism, but they knew the pattern. When someone stops complaining about the cold and says they're fine, actually quite comfortable, that's when you worry. But hypothermia isn't even the biggest killer. Respiratory illness is. Because cold air, dry air, and crowded sleeping quarters are the perfect breeding ground for disease. When you're lying in a communal chamber with 5 other scribes, all of you breathing the same stale air all night, if one person has a cough, everyone's getting that cough within days. It starts innocently enough. A scratchy throat, a mild cough. Nothing serious. You keep working because missing work isn't an option, you don't get paid sick days, and the manuscripts need copying regardless of how you feel. But the cough gets worse, deeper, wet-sounding. You're coughing up phlegm, sometimes streaked with blood. Your chest hurts. Breathing becomes difficult. This could be bronchitis, could be pneumonia, could be tuberculosis, the white plague that will ravage Europe for centuries. Medieval people call it consumption, because it seems to consume the sick person from within, wasting them away over months. You don't know what you have. The castle doesn't have doctors, maybe a barber surgeon who can set bones and pull teeth, but respiratory illness. That's beyond his expertise, so you rely on folk remedies. Hot poultices placed on your chest cloth soaked in warm water, and herbs, maybe mustard seed, to create heat. Someone might bleed you operating on the humoral theory that your body has too much phlegm and needs rebalancing. This doesn't help, probably makes things worse, but it's what's available. Meanwhile, you're still sleeping in the cold room, still trying to work during the day. Your body is fighting 2 battles simultaneously, trying to stay warm and trying to fight infection. Both battles require resources, calories, energy, metabolic capacity. If you're not getting enough food, if you're already weakened by weeks of cold exposure, your body starts making triage decisions. It can't do everything. Something has to give. Historians still argue about mortality rates for respiratory illness in medieval winter, but the evidence from monastic chronicles and household accounts suggests it was significant. Maybe 10 to 15% of a castle's population might die over a harsh winter. Not all from respiratory illness, some from accidents, some from other diseases, but illness was a major factor. The old scribes are most vulnerable. Men in their 50s and 60s who've spent decades in these conditions, whose lungs are scarred from years of breathing cold, smoky air. When they catch a winter cough, it's often fatal. They go to bed one night and they just don't recover. The cough gets worse instead of better. Fever sets in, delirium, then death usually within a week or two of the first symptoms. The young are vulnerable too, but in different ways. Children like Thomas the Apprentice, they're still growing, still developing. Their immune systems are robust in some ways, naive in others. A disease they've never encountered before can hit them hard. And if they're already stressed from cold, from poor nutrition, from the demands of apprenticeship, they might not have the reserves to fight back. There are other cold-related conditions that don't kill but cause immense suffering. Chilblains, those painful itchy inflammations of the fingers and toes caused by repeated exposure to cold and poor circulation. Your fingers swell up, turn red or purple itch like mad. Sometimes they crack and bleed. They make holding a quill agonizing, but you can't stop working, so you just endure. Apply some animal fat to the cracks, wrap your fingers in cloth and keep copying. Trench foot, or rather its medieval equivalent. When your feet stay cold and damp for days, the tissue starts to break down. Blisters form, skin sloughs off, infection sets in. This is particularly common among people who don't have good footwear, whose boots or shoes are worn through and let in moisture. Scribes are better off than peasants in this regard. You probably have intact shoes, but if your foot cloths stay damp, if you can't dry them out properly between wearings, you're at risk. Frostbite is rare inside a castle. The temperature usually doesn't drop low enough for tissue to actually freeze, but it happens. Extremities that are exposed for too long that don't get adequate blood flow. Your nose, your ears, your fingers. The tissue dies, turns black, eventually falls off if you survive long enough. A scribe who loses fingers can't work, can't hold a quill, can't earn a living. It's a career-ending injury. And then there's the slow grinding effect of malnutrition combined with cold. You're burning more calories in winter just to stay warm, but food supplies are lower. The castle stores grain-dried meat. Salted fish are being rationed to last until spring. You're not getting as much food as your body needs, so you're losing weight. Your body is breaking down its own fat and muscle for fuel. You're weaker, more susceptible to illness, less able to generate body heat. It's a vicious cycle. Some scribes don't die dramatically. They just fade, get thinner, paler, quieter. Stop complaining about the cold because they don't have the energy to complain. One morning they don't wake up. Heart failure maybe, or their body just gave up, decided that the cost of maintaining life was higher than the available resources could support. The survivors, and you're one of them lying here in the dark between William and the dog, carry these deaths with them. You knew the old scribe who died last February. You copied manuscripts beside him for 3 years. One day he was coughing, the next day he was bedridden, a week later he was dead. His spot at the desk was filled within days. His blankets were redistributed. Life continued. This is the unspoken reality of medieval winter. You're always aware that you might not make it. Not in a panicked, hyperventilating way. Just as a quiet background fact, like knowing that the sun will rise tomorrow. Some people die in winter. Maybe it'll be someone else. Maybe it'll be you. You take precautions, extra layers, shared warmth, evening prayers, and you hope. And most of the time, hope is enough. Most scribes survive most winters, but not all, never all. The wind outside shifts direction, and you hear it whistling through a different set of arrow slits. Somewhere in the castle, someone coughs a deep wet sound that echoes faintly through the stone corridors. You listen. The cough doesn't repeat. Whoever it is has either fallen back asleep or is lying awake worrying about what that cough means. You pull your blankets a little tighter. William's warmth is steady at your back. The dog's weight is solid at your feet. You're cold, but you're alive. And tonight, that's enough. Here's something you might not know. Medieval scribes left messages. Not just the texts they were paid to copy, but personal notes scribbled in the margins of manuscripts. Complaints, observations, little windows into their suffering. And some of the most poignant ones are about the cold. These marginal notes are called colophons when they appear at the end of a manuscript, or just glosses when they're scattered throughout. Officially they're supposed to be professional. The scribe's name, the date, may be a prayer for the reader. But sometimes when a scribe has been working for hours in miserable conditions, professionalism slips. Honesty creeps in, and what emerges is raw, immediate and heartbreaking. One scribe somewhere in northern Germany around the year 1200 wrote in the margin of a gospel manuscript, "The parchment is rough, the ink flows badly, and the hand that writes is stiff with cold." Just that. A simple statement of fact. But you can feel the frustration, the discomfort, the desperate attempt to maintain quality work under impossible conditions. Another copying a legal text in a French monastery around 1320. Oh, the cold. My fingers can barely hold the quill. The ink freezes in the horn. Christ have mercy on those who write in winter. The prayer at the end isn't formal liturgical language. It's genuine supplication, a plea for divine acknowledgement of suffering. One of the most famous comes from an Irish monastery, probably 9th or 10th century. I am very cold. The hand that writes these words will be stiff by morning, and then several lines later written in shakier script. It is done. Praised be God and St. Patrick. The deterioration in handwriting between those two notes suggests the scribe was losing fine motor control, as he worked his prediction coming true even as he wrote it. Historians still argue whether these marginal notes were acts of rebellion, scribes pushing back against the system that demanded perfection, regardless of conditions, or whether they were just human. Moments of vulnerability of reaching out across time to say I was here, I suffered, remember me. Some notes are darker. A scribe in a Scottish monastery, date unknown but probably 13th century, wrote beside a particularly difficult passage. Writing in winter is a kind of death. The ink is frozen, the hand is frozen, the heart is frozen. Only hell could be colder than this scriptorium, and at least in hell there is fire. This borders on blasphemy. Comparing earthly suffering to hell, suggesting hell might be preferable, that's not something you're supposed to write in a sacred manuscript. But the scribe wrote it anyway. Maybe he was past caring. Maybe the cold had driven him to a place where consequences didn't matter. Not all the notes are grim. Some show dark humour. A scribe copying a chronicle in England around 1250 wrote, "The saints preserve us from this cold, which is worse than any pagan invasion. The Danes merely killed us. Winter tortures us first." There's a joke buried in there, a comparison between historical Viking raids and contemporary weather, but it's a joke born from genuine misery. Humour as a coping mechanism. Another, 3 things are necessary for a scribe: a warm fire, good wine, and a patient master. I have none of these. Pray for me. This one includes a tiny sketch in the margin, a crude drawing of a shivering figure hunched over a desk. The drawing is barely competent, not the work of an illuminator, just a scribe doodling his own suffering. It survived 700 years. Some monasteries had rules against marginal notes. The Benedictine rule technically forbade adding personal commentary to sacred texts. But scribes did it anyway, usually in Latin, so that only the educated could read their complaints. It was a form of passive resistance. The monks in charge might disapprove, but they weren't going to throw away a perfectly good manuscript just because the scribe added a grumpy note about the cold. You lying in your bed have added your own marginal notes. Nothing dramatic. Mostly just brief prayers or acknowledgements at the end of particularly difficult copying sessions. Finished this text on the Feast of St. Martin, year of our Lord, 1350. God be praised. My fingers remember nothing but cold. It's formulaic enough to pass inspection, but anyone who reads it carefully will understand. Your fingers remember nothing but cold. That's not liturgical language. That's experience. Some of the saddest notes come from scribes who are copying medical texts, treatises on health and disease recipes for remedies, while they themselves were sick. There's a manuscript from southern France, a copy of a Hippocratic text on fevers, where the scribe wrote, "I copy these words about healing while I myself cough blood. The physician heals others but cannot heal himself. God grant that this text serves someone better than it serves me." That scribe probably didn't survive the winter. His handwriting deteriorates over the final pages of the manuscript. The letters become irregular, the spacing inconsistent. The last page has several blotted words, places where ink dripped, because the scribe's hand was shaking too badly to control the quill, and then someone else's handwriting takes over a different scribe, finishing the work. The first scribe's name is recorded in a brief colophon. Brother Geoffrey, who began this work, died before its completion. May God have mercy on his soul. The text was finished by Brother Martin. These manuscripts survive. They're in libraries now, carefully preserved behind glass or in climate-controlled storage. Modern scholars study them, transcribe them, analyse the handwriting for clues about scribal training and working conditions. But most people who look at medieval manuscripts don't notice the marginal notes. They're looking at the main text, the beautiful illuminated letters, the careful calligraphy, the religious or legal content. They miss the quiet voices in the margins, the cold, the pain, the fear, the occasional flash of humour, the prayers that sound less like formal liturgy and more like desperate bargaining with a God who might or might not be listening. You think about this sometimes when you're copying. Centuries from now, if anyone still cares about manuscripts, if the world doesn't end in plague or war or apocalypse, will someone read your marginal notes? Will they understand what it meant to sit at a desk with numb fingers and dying light copying words you barely understood, just trying to get through another day? Probably not. They'll see the finished manuscript and think how beautiful, how skilled, how patient these medieval scribes must have been. They won't see the cold, won't feel it, won't understand that every page was a small battle fought and won against conditions designed to prevent good work. But maybe, and this is a small hope barely worth acknowledging, maybe one person will read your marginal note carefully, will see past the formulaic prayer to the experience underneath, and will think a human being suffered to create this, a person with cold hands and tired eyes and fear in their heart, someone like me. That's what the marginal notes are really for. Not to complain, not to rebel, just to say I was here, I was cold. I survived long enough to finish this page. Remember that if you remember anything. William shifts beside you, pulling the blanket slightly. You adjust, making sure you're both still covered. The dog at your feet sighs a long, contented exhalation. Outside nothing, just wind and darkness and cold. Tomorrow you'll return to your desk. You'll pick up your quill, and maybe if the cold is particularly bad, if your fingers are particularly stiff, you'll add a small note in the margin. Nothing elaborate, just written in winter. God preserve the reader from such cold. And 700 years from now, someone might read it and understand. Medieval Europe is not a monolithic place. The cold you're experiencing tonight in northern France is different from what a scribe in southern Italy might face, or what a copyist in Scandinavia endures, or what a monk in the mountains of Switzerland survives. Geography matters. Climate matters. And the strategies for not freezing to death vary wildly depending on where you are. Let's start with the extreme north, Scandinavia, Iceland, the northern reaches of Scotland and Ireland. These places have winters that make your current discomfort look mild. Temperatures regularly drop below 0 Fahrenheit. Daylight in winter is measured in hours, not the full day you're accustomed to. The darkness is profound and long. Scribes in these regions, and yes, there are scribes, even in these remote places, monasteries clinging to rocky coasts, castle administrators keeping records for Norse chieftains, have developed their own survival techniques. Reindeer pelts are common. The fur is dense, hollow-shafted, incredibly insulating. A reindeer hide thrown over your bed is worth 3 or 4 wool blankets. Some northern scribes sleep in actual reindeer skin sleeping bags sewn enclosures that trap body heat like nothing else. Seal fat is another northern specialty. Not just for eating, though it's calorie-dense and valuable, but for coating skin. Rendered seal blubber rubbed on your hands, face any exposed skin, creates a waterproof, windproof barrier. It smells terrible. You reek of dead seal for weeks. But it works. Fishermen and hunters use it. Scribes who can get access to it use it too. In Iceland, some scribes work in turf houses, structures built partially underground with thick walls of stacked peat and turf that provide excellent insulation. The roofs are turf too. From a distance, these buildings look like grass-covered mounds. Inside, they're warmer than stone castles because earth is a better insulator than stone. The trade-off is darkness and dampness, but when the alternative is freezing, you accept the trade-off. Norwegian and Swedish scribes sometimes have access to soapstone, a soft rock that can be carved into bed warmers or heat-retaining blocks. Heat a soapstone in a fire, wrap it in cloth, place it in your bed. It stays warm for hours, far longer than ordinary river rocks. Some craftsmen carve soapstone into bowl shapes that can hold hot coals safely. It's like a medieval hot water bottle, but better. Historians still argue whether Northern European cultures had fundamentally different attitudes toward cold, whether they simply accepted it as an unchangeable fact of life more completely than Southern cultures did. The saga literature from Iceland certainly suggests a kind of stoic endurance. Men sleeping outdoors in snowstorms, wrapped only in cloaks, surviving through sheer willpower and good stories. Whether this is accurate or mythologized is debatable. Now swing south. Italy, southern France, the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. These regions have winter, but it's mild compared to what you're experiencing. Temperatures rarely drop below freezing inside buildings. Some nights are actually pleasant cool rather than cold. Scribes in these regions have different problems. They don't worry as much about freezing to death. Instead, they deal with dampness. Mediterranean winters are wet. Rain fog, humidity. Moisture seeps into everything. Manuscripts risk mildew. Ink behaves unpredictably in humid conditions. The cold they experience is a clammy, penetrating cold, not as intense as your sharp, dry cold, but somehow more psychologically oppressive. Southern scribes use braziers more liberally. Charcoal is cheaper in the south. Wood from olive trees and cork oaks burns hot and long. A small brazier can keep a scriptorium comfortable without consuming massive amounts of fuel. They also use heated tiles, ceramic tiles warmed by the fire, and placed under desks or near beds. The tiles radiate warmth gently, safely. In Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus, the approaches are different again. Muslim scholars and scribes have inherited Roman heating technology that Christian Europe largely abandoned. Some wealthy Islamic households have hypocauste systems still functioning. Others use mangals, ornate metal braziers designed for both heating and aesthetics, perforated to allow heat and light to escape in beautiful patterns. The cultural attitudes are different too. Islamic texts on medicine and health emphasize balance, hot and cold, wet and dry, in ways that lead to different prescriptions for staying warm. Spiced drinks are common. Tea with cinnamon and ginger, sweetened with honey. These drinks are thought to increase internal heat, according to Galenic medical theory, which Islamic scholars have preserved and elaborated. Move east, the Germanic lands, Poland, Hungary, the Slavic territories. Here the cold is severe, but the culture has adapted. Wooden architecture is more common than stonewood insulates better. Some castle chambers have wooden panelling over the stone walls, creating an air gap that reduces heat loss. It's expensive but effective. In these regions, communal heating is more developed. Large ceramic stoves, Kachelöfen in German, are built into walls. They're massive sometimes, taking up an entire corner of a room. You feed wood into them from one side, and they radiate heat from all surfaces. The ceramic holds heat for hours after the fire dies. A single good cachel can warm 2 or 3 rooms if properly positioned. Scribes in these areas often work in rooms adjacent to these stoves. Not close enough to risk fire, but close enough to benefit from radiant warmth through the wall. It's a luxury you don't have, and you know it. Eastern European castles are often warmer than French ones, at least in the inhabited sections. And then there's the Alps, mountain monasteries, scriptoria built at high altitudes where winter lasts 8 months and snow accumulates and drifts higher than a man. These are perhaps the most extreme conditions any European scribe faces. Alpine monks have developed almost scientific approaches to cold management. They understand that altitude makes cold worse, thinner air, less insulation from the atmosphere. They've learned that wind is the real killer, not just temperature. A calm day at 10 degrees is survivable. A windy day at 30 degrees can kill. So Alpine monasteries are built with wind protection in mind. Thick walls on the north and west sides, the prevailing wind directions. Sleeping quarters positioned on south-facing sides, where winter sun can provide some passive heating. Windows shuttered not just with wood, but with straw or wool packed into the gaps. Some Alpine scribes use something like modern layering systems, multiple thin layers of linen and wool rather than one thick layer. Air trapped between layers insulates better than bulk. They figured this out through trial and error, watching what works and what doesn't. Food is different too. Alpine diets in winter are heavily weighted toward fat and protein. Cheese preserved from summer milk is a staple, cured meats, nuts, anything calorie-dense. The body needs fuel to generate heat, and Alpine monks know this viscerally. You and your northern French castle occupy a middle ground. Not as extreme as Iceland, not as mild as Italy, not as technologically advanced as some eastern regions. You have wool and shared body heat and prayers. It's enough, usually. But lying here in the dark, you sometimes wonder what it would be like to be a scribe in a warmer place, to not have to fight this battle every single night. Then again, scribes in warmer places probably have different struggles. Insects, perhaps. Diseases that thrive in warmth. Nothing is perfect. Every place has its cost. The dog shifts at your feet. William's breathing is steady and deep. And you positioned somewhere in the vast spectrum of medieval European cold do what humans everywhere do: you adapt. You survive. You make it until morning, because that's the only choice there is. Now let's talk about privilege, because even within the cold, even within the shared misery of winter, in a stone castle, there's a hierarchy. And that hierarchy determines not just comfort, though it does determine comfort, but survival itself. Where you sleep, what you have, whether you live or die, these things are not equally distributed. At the top of the pyramid is the lord of the castle. His chamber, the solar usually positioned on an upper floor with southern exposure, is the warmest private space in the entire structure. Not warm by modern standards, but warm relative to everything else. He has a fireplace, an actual working fireplace with a proper chimney built into the wall, capable of burning logs throughout the evening without filling the room with smoke. His bed is enormous by medieval standards, maybe 6 feet wide with a proper wooden frame, often with posts at the corners that can support curtains. And yes, curtains heavy wool, or even velvet drapes that can be pulled closed around the bed, creating a smaller enclosed space that's easier to heat with body warmth. It's like a room within a room, a fabric fort against the cold. His mattress isn't straw, it's feathers. Multiple layers of them, a base mattress, then a feather bed on top, then sheets of linen, then more blankets than he could possibly need. Fur throws, fox rabbit, even imported ermine if he's wealthy enough. His pillow is down, not straw. His nightshirt is fine linen, possibly silk if he has trading connections. And he's not sleeping alone. He has his wife, of course, another heat source, but he also has the right to call servants if he wants. A chambermaid to warm the bed before he gets in it. A page to tend the fire, adding logs as needed, ensuring it doesn't die completely overnight. Privilege means you can outsource your survival to others. Historians still argue whether medieval nobles actually understood how privileged they were, or whether they simply took these advantages as natural and deserved. Some nobles wrote about the discomforts of winter in their private correspondence, complaining about cold despite having 10 times the resources you do. The human capacity for adaptation is remarkable. You can be objectively comfortable compared to others, and still feel subjectively miserable. Below the lord, the lady of the castle. Her chamber is almost as good as his, sometimes adjacent to his, with a connecting door. She has her own fireplace, her own luxurious bedding. She sleeps with her ladies-in-waiting, often noble women who serve her, who are themselves from good families who share her relative comfort. These women huddle together under shared furs, gossiping in whispers, maintaining warmth through numbers and quality materials. Then come the knights and higher-ranking members of the household. The marshal, the steward, the master of horse. These men get private alcoves or small chambers. Not fireplaces, those are too expensive and too few, but better positioning. Rooms closer to the kitchens where residual heat from cooking fires seeps through walls. Rooms with shuttered windows instead of just arrow slits. Better mattresses, more blankets, sometimes fur throws of their own. They're still cold, don't misunderstand, but they're survivably cold, uncomfortably cold rather than dangerously cold. They have resources to negotiate with the cold on better terms, and then there's everyone else, the working staff, the soldiers, the craftsmen, the scribes. You have wool and straw and shared sleeping spaces. You have communal chambers where body heat is pulled out of necessity, not choice. You have blankets that are serviceable but thin. You have no fire, no fur, no feather beds. What you have is what you need to survive barely and nothing more. But even within your tier there are gradations. The master scribe, remember, gets the spot near the former location of the brazier. He gets the best mattress available to scribes. His blankets are newer, thicker. This isn't generosity, it's economics. He's the most valuable scribe. Keeping him alive and functional is a priority. You're less valuable, so you get less. And Thomas the apprentice gets the absolute minimum, because he's the least valuable. He can be replaced most easily. His death would be regrettable but not catastrophic. So he gets the worst sleeping spot, the thinnest blankets, no bedmate. He survives, or he doesn't, based almost entirely on his individual constitution and luck. This is the brutal calculus of medieval resource allocation. Everything is scarce warmth food safety. Scarcity requires hierarchy. Hierarchy requires some people getting more and others getting less, and the less group exists right on the edge of survival. Now consider the peasants outside the castle walls. The vast majority of the medieval population, they're not living in stone structures, they're in wooden cottages with thatched roofs and wattle and daub walls, drafty, crude, minimal. But here's the thing. Many peasant cottages are actually warmer than castle chambers. Why size? A peasant cottage might be 20 feet by 15 feet. One main room, a central hearth that never goes out because the entire family depends on it for cooking warmth and light. That single fire heats the entire small space reasonably well, and the family, parents, children, grandparents, maybe a servant or two, all sleep together, in one big bed or on a shared sleeping platform. Maximum body heat efficiency. The trade-offs are obvious. Privacy none, hygiene questionable, social mobility impossible. But purely from a thermal survival standpoint, a peasant in a small cottage with a central hearth might be warmer at night than you are in your castle scriptorium. This creates a strange inversion. The castle symbol of power and wealth is actually less comfortable than humbler dwellings. The stone that makes it defensible makes it uninhabitable, at least in winter. The peasant who works in the castle's fields during the day might go home to a warmer bed than the nobleman who commands him. Of course, the nobleman has other advantages: security, food supply, legal protections, but comfort. That's more complicated. Then there are the truly unfortunate, the travelling poor, beggars, itinerant labourers, people without fixed homes. They sleep wherever they can in barns, if they're lucky in haystacks, if they're less lucky under hedgerows, if they're desperate. Some freeze to death every winter. Their bodies are found in spring when the snow melts casualties of a system that has no place for them. You think about this sometimes lying under your 5-wool blankets with William's warmth at your back. You're not at the top of the hierarchy, but you're not at the bottom either. You're in the middle, which means you can see both directions. You can see the comfort you don't have and the suffering you've avoided. It doesn't make you warmer, but it provides a strange kind of perspective. You're cold, yes. Uncomfortable, absolutely. But you're alive. You have shelter. You have blankets. You have community. By the standards of medieval Europe, you're doing okay, not well, not comfortably, but okay. And okay in 1350 is often the best you can hope for. The wind outside picks up again. Somewhere in the castle, in a chamber far warmer than yours, the lord is sleeping soundly under furs and feathers. Somewhere outside the walls, a beggar is dying quietly in a ditch. And you're here in the middle surviving another night. That's privilege medieval style. Not comfort. Just degrees of discomfort. Just better or worse versions of cold. You pull your blanket a little tighter and close your eyes. Let's talk about the things people believed. The remedies, the superstitions, the folk wisdom that circulated through castle corridors like the cold itself. Because when you're facing winter, night after night, when the cold feels like an active, malevolent force, rather than just absent heat, you'll try anything. And medieval people tried everything. Start with garlic. Garlic is considered a powerful protective substance, not just against vampires that folklore is mostly later invention, but against illness, evil spirits, and yes, the cold itself. Some scribes sleep with a clove of garlic under their pillow. The theory based on humoral medicine is that garlic is hot and dry, which counteracts the cold and wet properties of winter air. Does it work? No, not in any physiological sense. But the smell is distinctive and strong, and maybe having that sharp, pungent odour in your nostrils makes you feel like you're doing something active against the cold, rather than just passively enduring it. Others hang garlic braids above their beds, bulbs strung together on rope dangling from the ceiling beam. This serves multiple purposes: food storage, pest control, mice supposedly avoid garlic smell, and spiritual protection. The line between practical and magical thinking is thin in medieval culture. Maybe the garlic keeps you healthy because it's a useful antibiotic compound. Maybe it keeps you healthy because it wards off evil influences. Maybe both. Maybe neither. You hang it anyway because your grandmother swore by it. Then there are the blessed candles, particularly candles blessed during Candlemas February 2nd, the feast of the purification of Mary. These candles are kept throughout the year and lit during storms, illness, or times of particular danger. Some scribes light a blessed candle before bed. On the coldest nights, let it burn for a few minutes, then extinguish it. The blessed smoke, they believe, purifies the air and creates a protective boundary around the sleeping area. Is this superstition? Yes. But it's also ritual, and ritual provides psychological comfort. The act of lighting the candle, saying a prayer, extinguishing it carefully, this creates a sense of control in a situation where you actually have very little control. You can't make the castle warmer, but you can perform this small ceremony. And maybe that's enough. Iron is another protective substance. Horseshoes are particularly valued iron shaped into a protective curve already imbued with the strength and reliability of horses. Some people nail horseshoes above doorways to keep evil out. Others keep a small piece of iron under their pillow, a nail, a fragment of chain, anything iron. The logic is murky, a mix of Christian symbolism, iron nails of the crucifixion, older pagan beliefs about iron's power against fairies and spirits, and simple, practical observation that iron is strong and durable. You have a small iron nail tucked into the straw of your mattress. You don't really believe it does anything, but you also don't remove it. Why risk it? The nail costs nothing. If it helps, great. If it doesn't, you've lost nothing. Some remedies are more medicinal. Sheep's wool rubbed with lanolin and wrapped around your neck at night, supposedly this prevents colds and sore throats. The lanolin creates a moisture barrier, the wool insulates, and there's probably some actual benefit. But it's also recommended with near religious fervour, as if the sheep's wool is magically protective rather than just practically useful. Warming stones we've discussed, but there's a ritual component too. Some people bless the stones before heating them, making the sign of the cross, saying a quick prayer. The stone becomes not just a heat source but a sanctified object. God's warmth channeled through stone into your bed. It's touching in a way this desperate attempt to involve the divine in your cold, uncomfortable sleep. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually believed all this, or whether they were just hedging their bets. The evidence suggests it varied enormously by individual. Some people were devout believers in protective magic and blessed objects. Others were pragmatic. It probably doesn't work, but just in case. And some were probably skeptical but went along with it because everyone else did. There are darker remedies too, things that edge into what the church would call witchcraft if they caught you. Some people make small figures, crude dolls of straw or cloth, and burn them in the fire, whispering prayers or incantations. The figure represents winter-cold death. Burning it is sympathetic magic. Destroy the symbol, weaken the reality. This is dangerous. If a priest or a zealous monk caught you doing this, you could be accused of practicing pagan rituals. But people do it anyway, usually in secret, usually alone. The boundary between Christian prayer and older folk practices is porous and constantly negotiated. Some women, midwives, healers, older women with knowledge passed down through generations prepare protective sachets. Small cloth bags filled with herbs, rosemary, thyme, sage, maybe some dried flowers from summer. These are tucked under pillows or hung around necks. The herbs are warm, according to humoral theory. They're also aromatic, which makes breathing in cold air slightly more pleasant. Are these women herbalists or witches? Depends who you ask. Depends whether their patient lives or dies. Success makes you a healer. Failure makes you a witch. It's a precarious position. And then there are the prayers. Endless prayers. Not just the formal ones, Pater Noster, Ave Maria, but personal improvised prayers. Desperate bargaining with God and the saints. St. Martin, patron of soldiers and travellers, protect me through this night. St. Agatha, who endured torture by cold and fire, give me strength to endure this cold. St. Blaise, protector against throat illness, keep my lungs clear. Mary, Mother of God, intercede for me a sinner, that I might wake tomorrow to serve faithfully. You've said some version of these prayers dozens of times. Do you believe they work? You want to. You want to believe that someone somewhere in the celestial hierarchy is paying attention to your discomfort, that your suffering is witnessed and valued, that there's meaning in this cold beyond just the random cruelty of geography and architecture. William believes. You can hear him praying now, softly, barely audible, Latin phrases mixed with vernacular French. His faith seems uncomplicated, childlike even. He prays and he believes and he sleeps. You envy that certainty. Thomas the Apprentice probably prays too, though you suspect his prayers are more angry than supplicant. God, why do you hate me? Instead of, God, please protect me. The prayers of someone young enough to still expect fairness from the universe. Folk remedies blend into religious practice, blend into outright superstition. A society that can't control its environment through technology controls it through belief, or tries to, or pretends to. The truth is, none of these remedies do much. The garlic doesn't warm you. The blessed candle doesn't change the temperature. The iron nail under your pillow doesn't insulate you. The prayers might bring psychological comfort, but they don't alter physics. What works is the practical stuff: layers, shared body heat, adequate food, staying dry. Everything else is just coping. Just the human need to feel like you're doing something, anything to fight back against the cold. But maybe that matters too. Maybe the ritual, the belief, the attempt, maybe that's what keeps you human in conditions designed to reduce you to a shivering animal. Maybe faith, even in things that don't work, is its own kind of warmth. You reach down and touch the iron nail in your mattress straw, just checking it's still there, just maintaining the ritual, just surviving the night one small superstition at a time. So why? That's the question worth asking as you lie here in the cold waiting for dawn. Why did scribes endure this? Why did anyone copy manuscripts under these conditions when the work was exhausting? The pay was modest and the risk of dying from cold or illness was real. What made it worth it? The simple answer is economic necessity. Most scribes didn't have better options. If you were the son of a freeman farmer with too many children and not enough land learning, a trade was your path to stability. Scribal work meant literacy, which meant status. It meant you'd never starve castles and monasteries always needed copyists. It meant steady employment in a world where most people lived season to season, harvest to harvest, never knowing if next winter would be the one that killed them. But that's not the whole answer. Because there's something else happening when you copy a manuscript. Something that transcends the cold and the discomfort and the very real possibility of death. You're preserving civilization itself. That sounds grandiose, but it's true. In a world without printing presses, without computers, without any form of mechanical reproduction, the only way knowledge survives is if someone copies it by hand. Every manuscript is unique. Every copy is an act of preservation. If the original is destroyed by fire, by water, by war, by simple decay, the copies are all that remain. When you spend months copying a gospel, you're not just making words appear on parchment. You're ensuring that future generations can read those words, that the teachings survive, that the knowledge continues. You're a link in a chain stretching back to the original authors and forward to readers you'll never meet. Some of them haven't been born yet. Some of them will live centuries after you die. This isn't abstract philosophy. You've seen manuscripts that are centuries old, texts copied in the 5th or 6th century preserved through invasion and collapse and plague. The scribe who made that copy is dust now. His name is forgotten, but his work survived. His handwriting, the specific curves of his letters, the way he formed certain characters survived. He reached across time and touched you, and someday maybe your handwriting will reach across time and touch someone else. Some scribe or scholar in a future you can't imagine will look at a page you copied and think a human being made this. A person sat at a desk, cold and tired, and put these words on this page. And because of that person's labour, I can read this text now. Historians still argue whether medieval scribes thought about their work in these terms or whether this is modern romanticism projected backward. But the evidence suggests at least some of them understood. The prayers they wrote in margins, "May this text endure," aren't just about the physical manuscript lasting. They're about the ideas, the knowledge, the culture itself enduring. There's also the matter of salvation. For monastic scribes especially, copying sacred texts was a form of prayer. Every letter was an act of devotion. The suffering, the cold, the pain, the exhaustion was offered up as penance. Your discomfort brought you closer to God. Your labour was sanctified. The manuscripts you created were holy objects not just because of their content, but because of the sacrifice that went into making them. You're not a monk. You're a working scribe in a secular castle. But you've absorbed some of this thinking anyway. When you're copying a particularly difficult passage, when your fingers are numb and your back is screaming and you just want to stop, sometimes you tell yourself this matters. This work matters. Not just for the pay, not just for your survival, but because it's worth doing. Because knowledge is worth preserving. And there's beauty in it. Real beauty. When you copy a well-written text, clear Latin elegant phrasing ideas that fit together like pieces of carved stone, there's satisfaction in reproducing it accurately. You're not creating it, but you're participating in it. You're the instrument through which these words move from one page to another, one generation to another. You're part of something larger than yourself. On the best days when the light is good and your hand is steady and the text flows smoothly from exemplar to copy, you enter a state of focused calm. The cold recedes. The discomfort fades. There's just the work. Just the rhythm of dipping the quill, forming letters, spacing words. It's meditative. Almost transcendent. Those moments are rare. Most days are just grinding labour. But the rare moments justify the rest. They remind you why you're doing this. And then there's the community. You're not suffering alone. William beside you. Thomas in the corner, the master scribe in his better bed. You're all in this together. Shared suffering creates bonds. You help each other when you can. Share extra food. Warm stones, advice on staying warm. Complain together. Laugh at the absurdity together. Survive together. When spring finally comes, and it will come, it always does, you'll all remember this winter. You'll remember the nights you didn't think you'd make it. The mornings when waking up felt like a victory. And you'll have survived it together, which means something. It means you're not just colleagues. You're brothers in suffering, connected by shared experience in a way that's deeper than friendship. This is what medieval scribes endured for. Not just money or status or salvation, but meaning, purpose, connection, the knowledge that their work mattered and would continue to matter long after they were gone. You pull the blankets tighter one last time. William's warmth is steady at your back, the dog is solid at your feet. Thomas has finally stopped shifting and seems to be sleeping. Outside, the darkness is just beginning to grey at the edges. Dawn is coming. You've made it through another night, another small victory in the long war against winter. Tomorrow you'll wake sore and stiff and cold. You'll return to your desk, you'll pick up your quill, and you'll copy line by line, word by word, because that's what scribes do. You'll copy because the work must continue, because knowledge must be preserved, because someone somewhere someone will need these words that you're laboriously transferring from one parchment to another. You'll copy because it's worth doing, because you're part of something that began before you were born and will continue after you die, because in a world of cold stone and darkness and suffering there's still meaning to be found, still beauty to be preserved, still hope that tomorrow will be warmer. The grey at the window edges grows lighter. Dawn. You've survived. And tonight you'll do it all again. There's one more thing worth mentioning before we leave you to face the morning. Something that doesn't fit neatly into discussions of blankets, or body heat, or folk remedies, but matters perhaps more than any of those things. It's the stories, the ones scribes tell each other in the dark during that wakeful period between first and second sleep, when the night feels endless and the cold presses close. These aren't the stories you copy during the day, not the Latin texts about saints, or the legal documents about land disputes. These are the old stories, the ones passed down orally, the ones that probably shouldn't be told in a Christian castle, but get told anyway when the darkness makes everyone brave and reckless. William knows dozens of them. On the coldest nights, when Thomas is whimpering quietly in his corner, and even the dog seems miserable, William starts talking. His voice is low, barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the sleeping chamber everyone can hear. Tonight, or rather during last night's wakeful period, because you're remembering this now as dawn approaches, he told the story of the frozen bride. It's a local tale, something that supposedly happened 3 or 4 generations ago in a village not far from here. A wedding in deep winter, the bride and groom walking from the church back to the groom's house for the feast. A sudden storm. The bride in her thin dress caught in the wind and snow. They found her. The next morning, William said, standing upright in a snowdrift, frozen solid, still in her wedding dress, her eyes open, her hand raised as if waving. The groom went mad with grief and refused to let them bury her until spring. Kept her body in the barn, preserved by cold, visiting her every day to tell her about his life without her. Is it true? Probably not. But it doesn't matter. The story serves a purpose. It reminds you that the cold is ancient, powerful, indifferent. It's killed before, and it will kill again. You're not special. You're not immune. The only thing between you and the frozen bride is luck and vigilance and the warmth of the people around you. Thomas asked, a voice small in the darkness. Did they finally bury her? In April, William said. When the ground thawed enough to dig, they say she looked the same as the day she froze, 20 years old forever. The groom died the following winter. Some say he wanted to. Some say the cold took him because he'd already given his heart to it. There was silence after that. The kind of silence that feels full rather than empty. Everyone thinking about frozen brides and grieving grooms and the thin line between survival and tragedy. Other nights the stories are different, less sad, more strange. The tale of the scribe who copied so many manuscripts his hand became fused to his quill. Even after death they couldn't separate them, so they buried him, with the quill still clutched in his fingers. The story of the castle where the hearth fire went out after burning for 200 years, and that same night every person in the castle died in their sleep frozen in their beds. The legend of St. Scholastica, who prayed so hard for warmth that angels brought her coals from heaven itself. Historians would call these apocryphal, folk tales, superstition. But they're more than that. They're how medieval people process their fear, how they make sense of the cold that threatens them every winter. The stories transform random suffering into narrative, into something with meaning, with cause and effect, with moral lessons. Don't be proud like the groom who defied death, accept loss, and move on. Don't let your work consume you like the scribe with the fused hand. Keep the hearth fire burning, tend to the practical things that keep you alive. Pray with sincerity like St. Scholastica, and maybe divine intervention will come. The stories also create connection. When William tells them you're not just individual scribes trying to survive individual nights, you're part of a tradition, part of a culture that's been fighting winter for generations. Your suffering is not unique. It's shared across time with countless others who've lain in cold beds and wondered if they'd see morning. Some nights you tell stories too. You know, different ones. Tales from your home region, stories your mother told you, legends you heard from travelling merchants. The time wolves came into a village during a harsh winter, and the villagers had to burn half their houses to create enough fire to drive them away. The winter so cold that birds fell frozen from the sky mid-flight. The year the river froze solid enough that merchants drove carts across it for 3 months. Are these stories true? Some probably contain kernels of truth. Others are pure invention, but they're all emotionally true. They're all about the same thing: humans facing an environment that wants to kill them, and humans refusing to die quietly. Finding ways, practical, magical, communal, desperate to survive. Thomas is too young to have many stories yet, but he listens hungrily. He's building his own collection, gathering tales to tell when he's older, when he's the one trying to comfort frightened apprentices on cold nights. The stories are inheritance. Knowledge passed down not through manuscripts, but through whispered conversations in the dark. And here's the thing about these stories: they work. Not in any magical sense, they don't make you warmer or safer, but they make the night shorter. They give you something to think about besides the cold. They remind you that you're human, not just a suffering body, but a thinking, feeling, storytelling creature. The cold can threaten your body, but it can't take away your voice, your imagination, your connection to others through shared narrative. The stories are survival technology as surely as wool blankets and shared body heat. Maybe more so, because you can lose your blankets, your bedmate, your fire. But as long as you can speak, as long as someone will listen, you have the stories. And the stories say others have survived this, others have suffered and endured, you can too. William has gone quiet now, drifting back towards second sleep. Thomas is breathing evenly asleep, or pretending to be. The dog is gone already, begging for scraps in the kitchen, and you're left with the stories echoing in your mind: the frozen bride, the eternal fire, the scribe with the fused hand. You don't know if these stories will survive. Probably not. They're oral tradition, passed scribe to scribe, generation to generation, but never written down. Not important enough for parchment, not sacred enough for preservation. When the last person who knows them dies, they'll vanish. Unlike the manuscripts you copy, which might last centuries, these stories are ephemeral, fragile, mortal. But for now, tonight, they're alive. Living in your memory, ready to be told again tomorrow night or next week or next winter, when someone needs them. The window is fully light now. The grey has given way to pale morning. Time to rise, time to face the day, but you carry the stories with you in visible armour against the cold proof that you're more than just flesh and fear. You sit up, slowly, joints protesting. William groans beside you. Another day begins. But tonight, when the darkness returns and the cold seeps back in, the stories will be waiting, ready to be told again, ready to remind you why you endure. And that perhaps is the real answer to why scribes survived medieval winters, not just through blankets and body heat and folk remedies, but through stories, through the human need to transform suffering into narrative, to find meaning in hardship, to connect with others across time and space through shared tales of survival. The cold is old and powerful and patient, but stories are older still. And as long as humans have voices and listeners, the stories will outlast the cold. Every single time. You stand now feeling every joint protest, every muscle stiff from the night. The cold air hits you fully, no longer filtered through blankets and shared warmth. This is the price of mourning, the cost of continuing, but you pay it. Everyone pays it. William is moving beside you. Thomas is stirring in his corner, and somewhere in the castle the master scribe is already awake, already thinking about the day's work ahead. The manuscripts are waiting. The words need copying. The knowledge needs preserving. And tonight, many hours from now, you'll return to this same bed, this same struggle, this same quiet battle against the cold. But you'll also return to the stories, to William's whispered tales and Thomas's eager listening, and the shared understanding that you're all in this together, fighting not just for survival, but for something larger, something that matters. The cold is patient, but so are you. And the stories will outlast everything. Dawn has come, another night survived. The cycle continues, and somewhere in the turning of that cycle, in the repetition of suffering and endurance and small victories, there's something almost like hope. You take your first step toward the door, toward the day, toward whatever comes next. The cold follows. But so do the stories, and that makes all the difference. The story ends here. See you in the next video. Good night.